justice for all.
Thank you. Start off with a roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Charnowski.
Here.
Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement. Therefore, we have a quorum and are able to formally conduct business today. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank all those that we can't see that are watching virtually. I also like to thank everybody that we can see here in the Commissioner's Room joining us today in person. I'd like to remind everybody that support documents, those are documents that support agenda items when they are available, are embedded into the agenda ahead of the meeting. If you go to cityofrehoboth.com, in the center of the home page on the right side, you'll find a lime green box that has the legislative portal documents. Click onto that and then search the calendar box up top right corner, and you'll be able to bring up this meeting and any other meetings that you choose to look at. And again, the support documents, when they are ready, are available in there. Let's see here. I would like to indicate that correspondence is also embedded in the agenda, so we don't have to read it. There is an email from Mike Strange dated June 4th. He also has one that we'll read during the no left turn topic, dated July 1. It's not embedded because it's received too late, kind of missed our deadline. They need to be submitted a sufficient time ahead of time so that we're not working over the weekend if possible. And then we also have an email with attachments received from Jeffrey and Suzanne Good in reference to their topic, so we will address it at that time. With that, we'll go to the city manager's report. And before we do that, I would like to offer the mayor's compliment to the city staff and the police and everybody. I understand for the police, it takes over 150 people to pull off the July 4th fireworks. And it was just an amazing time. I think everything, for the most part, went off well. I always focus on trash and trash collection, and I think we did an excellent job this past July 3rd and 4th weekend. So thank you very much. With that, I'll turn it over to Evan Miller, and I will recognize all the city staff that's here in addition to the Ann Womack, city secretary, is here. Matt Janis, building and licensing supervisor. Kevin Williams, public works supervisor. Lynn Cohen, communications specialist. And Glenn Mendalis, city solicitor, and interim city manager Evan Miller. Now, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, commissioners, members of the public. A note on the fireworks, so they certainly were well attended as usual. It seemed like, at least from my own observations, that we had a lot more people in town this year compared to previous years. Certainly, we also had lots of traffic leaving town after the fireworks, but things did return to normal by 1 a.m. Trash pickup and beach raking were done the night of, which left us in good shape for the morning. Sunday and Monday, though, were also very heavy with trash just from our own visitors, but also those hanging around to watch the Dewey Beach fireworks from our beach. So we'll continue to pick up trash today along the boardwalk and beach, in addition to the residential trash collection. So again, I want to thank the fire company, Public Works Department, Police Department, Corey Grohl with the bandstand, Lynn Cohen, our communications specialist, and certainly all of the outside agencies that helped make the fireworks a success, so thank you. Water service line inspections. The water department staff will begin undertaking the water service line inventory on private properties this week. We'll start inspections from Lake Drive to Philadelphia Street between Bayard and Scarborough Avenues. Inspections are required as part of the EPA's revisions to lead and copper rules, and generally will require access to the property's crawl space or basement. Staff plans to leave behind information that indicates the property service line, and additional information, including answers to frequently asked questions, can be found on the city's website under government /current city projects. The State Road landscaping project is complete. Landscaping of a 6,000 square foot triangle of land at State Road and Lee Street was completed last week. More than 800 plants were planted, and this helps create a beautiful entrance to town that will help attract pollinators, butterflies, and songbirds. Our thanks to Speaker Pete Schwarzkopf and Senator Ernie Lopez for providing community transportation funds for this project, to DelDOT for its support and cooperation, and of course to former Commissioner Dick Byrne for proposing the project to the state representatives. An update on the new beach mats. They have been received and several have been installed, but full implementation of the new mats will take place after the anticipated beach replenishment this fall, winter timeframe. Our thanks to Pete Schwarzkopf for his assistance in funding these additional mats. The ocean outfall inspection, Ballard Marine Construction completed an every 2-year cleaning and inspection of the ocean outfall late last week, and we are still awaiting their report, so more to come. This fall, as part of its annual street paving program, the city will repave Norfolk Street from approximately Scarborough to Bayard, and Scarborough from approximately Lake Drive to Hickman Street. We'll also be replacing the water main on Norfolk Street, and a pre-bid meeting will be held with the contractors July 14th, and bid opening is scheduled for July 28th. An update on parking meter and permit revenue for the month of June. So for the month of June 2022, we did $1,413,452 compared to last year, which was $1,128,719, for an increase of $284,733. For permit sales for the month of June, we are down compared to 2021, though we were up in April and May. So total permit sales for the month of June, 191,645. Total permit sales for 2022, $816,310, which is an increase of $104,000 roughly compared to last year. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions by the commissioners? Commissioner Sharp?
I just have 2 items. I too was very impressed with the show on the 3rd for the fireworks, and thank everybody who contributed to that. I am very curious, all the upside that we have, was there any difference or change in the environment? It seems like large events in our country these days are getting a little more challenging from behavioral standpoints. Did we see anything that gives us an indication that we are experiencing some changes by any chance?
I did have a talk with the police chief this morning, and it seemed like the events that unfolded, at least that they had responded to, generally were normal from previous years. So no, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary or anything that caused us any grave concern. And I think that's largely attributed to all the planning efforts that the police department does and all the work that they do with outside agencies to make it a smooth process.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
That's great. The other issue is the state road. Installation is stunningly beautiful.
Thank you.
When I came around there this morning, it was just very, very
Agreed.
pleasant. I'm curious on the maintenance of it, since many of our residents and commissioners as well are very in tune with how things are maintained. How's that going to work out?
Sure. So that will be maintained by Sposato. I had a meeting last week with Liz and the representative from Sposato, just in general about the comments we've received about weeding and just overall maintenance. One of the comments I shared was we continue to add landscaping, beautiful landscaping, some landscaping that's higher maintenance. So one of the plans is that they will be dedicating someone strictly to pruning and weeding during our busy months. And we'll see how that goes and certainly make adjustments as the time goes on.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tony. And I just want to reiterate every moment I can that publicly I've stated that there needs to be a maintenance component for every project we do, especially the new ones. But we need to look back retroactively also. Commissioner Bennett and then Commissioner Legree.
Yes, thank you. As city manager, the buses that run up and down Rehoboth Avenue during the fireworks, are those provided by the city or is that the state?
State.
Okay, so they're paying for that?
Yep.
And for a future meeting, could you get some idea of ridership?
Sure.
That was a big topic because I live on Rehoboth Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Legree.
I echo, I was at a get-together on the 3rd with mostly citizens, and they had the same concerns that Commissioner Sharp had about the landscaping problem. And I want to side in with her on that. My next question is, we're going to replace water mains on the streets that we're repaving, is that correct?
Yes.
Have we given any thought, and I hope the answer is yes, have we given any thought to taking the city-owned lateral to the property line instead of making the homeowner pay for the lateral that comes up to the main?
We have not at this point.
You know, I have mentioned this several times in public, and I'm mentioning it again. We need to make it more accessible for the homeowner and not have to tear up the street to the middle of when they hook up a new house.
Well, Commissioner, I think that rises to the level of needing a separate agenda item.
I have no idea whether.
So that would be.
But I'm making it a public statement right now.
Well, I'm saying that I'm amenable to that. So.
Great, let's not drop it off and never.
Amenable to putting it on the agenda and discussing it. Absolutely, absolutely.
I will keep reminding us that we need to put that on the agenda.
Very good, very good. Thank you. And I'd like to make a comment. Earlier, the chief just came in. We talked about the success of the July 4th fireworks, in part, largely in part to pre-planning and efforts there. And I just wanted to share a little thing with you that I was standing out one evening, fireworks evening with Chief Banks on the front steps of City Hall here. And people kept coming by. And I tell you, it was exciting because every time families came by with little kids, Chief waved at them and the little kids waved back. It was just community policing at its heart. But one gentleman came up with his family and he interrupted Chief and I talking, and he said, excuse me, could you tell me why there's such a big police presence in town today? And I thought that if it had just been 24 hours separate, that man wouldn't have been asking that question. So anyhow, I think overall, you all did a great job because of your planning and all your efforts. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Evan. With that, is there any member of the... Yeah, Commissioner Gossett. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of things. Again, it's a great fireworks demonstration, and things worked out the best they could, I'm sure. But I would like if we could have at the next regular meeting an update, a financial recap of the expenses for the fireworks, not only with regards to the actual cost of the fireworks themselves, but just manpower and what have you. It's the expense of the city. And follow up on the water system inspections. Is that going to be, you mentioned it's an update on the website, but are we in a position yet to notify in advance sections of the city that in a time frame that the inspections will be done?
Sure, I can work with Kevin and Lynn on that and see if we can't put upcoming locations on the city website if it's not already.
So that can be done in advance,
Yes.
that people get a couple weeks warning as to when people will be in their neighborhood. And will these be city employees doing this, or is this an outside contractor?
City employees.
So they'll have identification and
Yes.
vests and what have you, so people realize who they are. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And by the way, I've already put in the motion to do a financial report. And I've actually asked the chief, I've suggested that giving us a report on the total logistics and planning, I thought would be very interesting because it is very labor intensive and it starts months ahead of time. And I thought everybody would enjoy listening to that. So thank you for bringing that up. With that, is there any members of the audience that have a question for the city manager? Remember that his city manager questions wouldn't be answered till the end of the agenda. Seeing none, we'll go to the next.
Mayor, I'm sorry. Just one related follow-up question. Evan, I know a few years ago, and you'll probably go in more detail when we go over the costs, which is fine. But was this the final year of the prepaid fireworks?
It is, yes. This was the final year.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. With that, we'll go on to the next item of business. You have nothing else in your city manager's report. We'll go to the city solicitor's report.
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I have to update is on the 330 Hospitality Group case. That's the rezoning case at 330 Rehoboth Avenue. The insurance defense attorney, Dan Griffith, filed a motion to dismiss last week in that case. So that's the first step in that process. So that case is still very young, but this is a motion that if we win on every count, it'll dismiss the entire complaint. That was filed July 1st. They have a responsive, I'm sorry, that was, we filed that July 1st. They'll have 30 days to respond to it. The other case I wanted to mention was the Market versus Rehoboth Beach case. That's the Board of Adjustment case dealing with Bellhaven variance. We have filed an answering brief. I guess our answering brief is due July 18. So that's the next thing coming up in that case. Still, we're in a briefing schedule there. I think I forwarded all of you the first brief that was filed in that case last week. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions of city solicitor? If not, we'll move to the next item of business, which is the first item of old business. A, discuss a draft ordinance to amend Municipal Code 270-19 use restrictions of the zoning code to permit a restaurant dining patio to exist on a parcel abutting the parcel upon which a restaurant is situated, whether or not the parcels are in common ownership. This is our second or third, I think it's our second major visit to this topic. If you recall, there was a desire on the part of at least some of us to examine property directly next door abutting a restaurant, and specifically addressing that zoning prohibition that that restaurant cannot utilize property next door or abutting it for outside dining patios because of the zoning code and the way it's worded, if that property is of different ownership than the primary premise property that the restaurant is on. So we're in the middle of discussing that. This is our second time. Glenn Mendalis was absent at the last meeting. He was tasked by me to listen to the audio and take notes. So he will be addressing some of the concerns that came up at that last meeting. And also embedded into the agenda is a version 2 of that zoning code that is in front of us. And if you want to put on the air media there, please. So we have a new version in front of us dated July 1. It supersedes the version 1 dated May 25th. And again, it's embedded in the agenda. And it defines accessory structure as well as some other. Glenn, do you want to start off by maybe articulating what the two versions, how they're different? And then we'll see if we want to go to any commissioner questions before we have you address concerns posed at the last meeting.
Sure, Mayor, thanks. So this second version does a couple things. First, you'll notice in the title that it amends section 270-4 as well as 270-19B. The original version amended only section 270-19B that deals with dining patios in the zoning code. 270-4 is the definition section in the zoning code. So I've added a definition of accessory structure to say a structure on the same lot with and of a nature customarily incidental and subordinate to the principal structure. That definition tracks the definition of accessory structure that's in the building code. So it's exactly the same and similar to other jurisdictions that I looked at. There is a definition of accessory building that to the extent we move forward to this ordinance, I'm going to be sure that the definition of accessory structure doesn't somehow get sideways with the definition of accessory building. I don't think it does. Interestingly, the original version of this ordinance referred to a dining patio on an abutting property as an accessory structure. I've removed that this time around, so that's starting at line 56, where we deal with dining patios existing on a parcel abutting the parcel upon where the restaurant sits. It used to refer to those dining patios as accessory structures. I struck that because no place else, I started thinking about it, and no place else when we deal with dining patios are they referred to as accessory structures. They're just referred to as dining patios, although I recognize that the term accessory structure is used 14 times in the zoning code. So I went ahead and left the definition of accessory structure in so that we have some definition going forward for accessory structure. However, to be clear, this definition of accessory structure is not necessary now for this ordinance dealing with dining patios. So you could actually separate the accessory structure definition out and make it a separate ordinance if you wanted to, but because it came up in the context of dining patios, I left it in this ordinance. Again, that was not necessary to what you're dealing with today, being dining patios on abutting properties. So you won't find the term accessory structure any place in line 56 through 66, which is the meat of this ordinance. So now it reads at line 56 through 66, dining patios may exist on a parcel abutting the parcel upon which the restaurant is situated, whether or not the parcels are in common ownership. In the event the parcels are not in common ownership, no supplemental permit of compliance shall be issued unless the owner or owners of the parcel upon which the dining patio is to be situated provides an affidavit in a format provided by the city, certifying that the applicant for a supplemental permit of compliance has been granted permission to locate the dining patio upon the owner's or owner's parcel. A dining patio on an abutting parcel shall be located within blank feet of the restaurant, and the dining patio walking surface may be elevated to a maximum height of blank feet. The dining patio shall be removed if the restaurant associated with the dining patio ceases to operate for a period of 1 year. So the changes there generally are that the previous version said that the applicant had to certify that the owner of the property was basically okay with the structure, with the patio being constructed on their property. Here it changes to requiring that an affidavit be provided in a format developed by the city. This sort of tracks the language in the Planning Commission provisions where if a owner permits a future buyer or an equitable owner or some other person to bring a Planning Commission application, they have to fill out an affidavit that was developed by the Planning Commission. So we would create an affidavit that's similar to that Planning Commission affidavit, and the commissioners would not grant a permit of compliance for these sorts of dining patios without an owner's affidavit saying that they're permitting this structure to be built on their property. I did include in line 63 through 66 sort of the location that it can exist on the lot and the height that it can be elevated to. I'm not sure that's necessary, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to think about it because that's something that was raised during that last meeting. The current definition, though, of dining patio, let me find it. The current definition of dining patio in 270-4 is a deck or porch, whether covered, uncovered, raised, or at grade, used in connection with a restaurant and a part of abutting, adjacent, or adjoining thereto. So the location is kind of already defined in the definition of dining patio that it has to be a part of abutting, adjacent, or adjoining the restaurant. So under this definition that currently exists, you couldn't, for example, go on to the second lot, have the dining patio pushed all the way in the back corner. So it has to be abutting the restaurant. So if this definition remains of dining patio and a dining patio on an adjoining lot, you'd have to have a scenario where the restaurant actually comes up to the next parcel and the dining patio would need to be adjacent, adjoining, or abutting the restaurant. It does also say in that definition, a deck or porch, whether covered, uncovered, raised, or at grade. So under this definition, it allows for dining patios to be raised or at grade. Again, I've included within this revised ordinance an opportunity for you to limit how high it can be raised or do something different, but under the current definition of dining patio, it can be at any grade so long as, or at any raised to any elevation, so long as it's consistent with the height limitations and any other building code restrictions that Mr. Janis would identify. The final thing that's been added to the ordinance is that the dining patio shall be removed if the restaurant associated with the dining patio ceases to operate for a period of 1 year. So if the restaurant stops operating as a restaurant or goes out of business or has a change of business, the patio has to be removed within a year. A year is just a term that I selected because that's typically, oftentimes you see ordinances that, for example, if there's a non-conforming grandfathered use, if it ceases to be, if that use ceases for a period of a year, typically a year is the time, then that grandfathered status expires. So those are the changes to the ordinance. I'm happy to address some of the other things that came up during the meeting that I didn't attend, since the mayor asked me to do that. But if there are questions you'd like to ask before I get into that, I'm happy to answer them.
Glenn, since all these edits here basically stemmed from the last conversation, basically, and you've got additional points that were raised to address, I suggest maybe you could do that next, and then we'll go to the commissioners, unless anybody has a question right now. So again, everything we've seen stems from the questions at the last meeting.
Right.
And then you're going to bring up some individual points after having listened to the audio.
Right.
And then give your perspective on those other individual points, please. Go ahead.
A question that's here. Curious as to, following just protocol, on line 56 there, you don't show the strike-through or the removal of that as an accessory structure. So
Right, the reason I do that, I'll be honest with you, I don't like this strike-through. The versions of the ordinances showing strike-through and underlining don't really work in the context of an ordinance that says how we're changing the code is shown by strike-through and underlining. So this section, section 2 says, we're gonna amend chapter 270, section 279 to 19B, is hereby further amended by making insertions as shown by underlining as follows. Typically we say is showing underlining for insertions and strike through for deletions. If I was to show on this ordinance that at one point it used the word accessory structure and then strike through it, it would suggest that in the current code, accessory structure is there and we're deleting it, if that makes sense.
but it is in the current code.
It's not. This is all new language, and that was proposed new language in the first version of the ordinance.
So then, if it wasn't there in the beginning, I understand that. Then, so why are we defining accessory structure?
Because some of the criticism during the last meeting was that we use accessory structure in that current draft of the ordinance, but there's no definition of accessory structure. The other thing was pointed out, though, during that meeting is that the term accessory structure is used 14 times in the zoning code, right, regardless of this ordinance. So I thought that it makes sense that since the issue was raised as to no definition of accessory structure, this is an appropriate time to include a definition of accessory structure and just get it done.
But as defined right now, a structure on the same lot. So, but we're talking of abutting or adjoining lots. So how does that apply?
So I don't know that it does apply. Again, the reason I struck accessory structure from the original ordinance is because no place in any other area where we deal with dining patios or where the code deals with dining patios, it doesn't refer to them as accessory structures. So I thought here it actually started to create some confusion that why is it an accessory structure on an abutting lot but not an accessory structure if it's on the same lot? So I decided we probably shouldn't even refer to it as an accessory structure. I haven't spoken with Mr. Janis to determine whether he would view it as an accessory structure or just part of the main structure because it abuts or adjoins. But because it wasn't treated or at least referred to as an accessory structure for existing dining patios, I didn't think that it was necessary to do it for these dining patios.
But I guess isn't that where the original, when you were asked how it would be treated, you would respond that, I believe, Mr. Janis, that it was an accessory structure. Am I incorrect with that?
Why don't you have a seat for the conversation there, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, it would be viewed as an accessory structure.
It would be.
Yes.
A dining patio on an abutting lot.
It would have to be an accessory structure. It couldn't be a main structure. So it would have to be defined as an accessory.
So what's being set up here is an exception to the general rule. The general rule is that everything that you construct has to be on your lot, has to be, so an accessory structure consistent with the proposed definition is on the same lot. Everything in this proposed ordinance is an exception to the rule. So it's on a different lot. The lot coverage, which we'll get into, the lot coverage issues and FAR issues would have to be dealt with as to the abutting lot and not as to the restaurant lot. So there's a lot of exception type language in this section. So to be clear, this is, these sorts of things only occur a few times within the zoning code. There's the off-street parking allowance, 750 feet away if you own the lot. I mean, that's sort of an exception to the general rule that your off-street parking has to be on your lot. So, you should view this as an exception. This ordinance should almost say at the beginning of Section 9, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this chapter, a dining patio may exist on an abutting lot.
So it violates the definition of accessory structure, but lines 56 plus carve out that exception that make it legal.
Right. That's right.
So making it legal for the specific dining patio, I guess I raised this question before, is this spot zoning? Why couldn't this, if I want to build a swimming pool on the lot next to me, or a tennis court, or a garage, or a shed, or an accessory dwelling unit, is that, are we just, is this spot zoning?
It's not. You as the legislators have the ability to make legislation so long as it's equally applicable throughout the district. So you could say within a certain district, be it residential or commercial, if the adjacent property says, certifies through an affidavit that it's okay to build their swimming pool on my lot, if you all pass legislation allowing for that, you could do it. The reason it's not spot zoning, I have it up because he asked me to go through a few of these things. So in Delaware, spot zoning is generally defined as an attempt to wrench a small lot or a small area from its environment and give it a new rating that disturbs the tenor of the compatibility. Normally, spot zoning benefits a private interest and has no relation to the general public interest. And that's from a case called McQuail versus Shell Oil. It's a Delaware Supreme Court case. So generally, spot zoning is, think for example, in the residential district, there happens to be a large parcel in the middle of it. Some interest group comes in and wants to do a paper mill or something that would be so out of character in the residential district, but you all rezone that property to allow for a paper mill. That's spot zoning. You're giving some private interest or some individual special privileges and rights that are so different than the rest of the community that is clearly out of kilter and should not be permitted.
Aren't we giving individuals rights and abilities to build a patio on an adjacent lot, but I can't build a swimming pool or a tennis court or garage?
Again, no, because you're giving everybody in the district the right to build a patio or build a dining patio if they have a restaurant on the adjoining lot, if the neighbor says it's okay. I know it's very, very limited circumstances it's going to occur, but everybody has that right. If they can build a restaurant and the neighbor says,
only restaurants that serve alcohol.
only restaurants
That was the question I asked at the last meeting, is did this apply to food establishments or restaurants that don't serve alcohol? And there was not an answer. But in this section of the code, on line 25, it talks about dining patios licensed, constructed, or expanded after June 1 shall only be used for consumption of food and beverage consistent with the following provisions. And it talks about the permit of compliance. This is all about restaurants that serve alcohol.
You're right that it references permits of compliance. So, and the only restaurants that require permits of compliance are those that serve alcohol. So I think that's probably the correct analysis. But you, again, you're the policymakers. If you wanted to permit restaurants not serving alcohol to do dining patios on an adjacent lot, that's your discretion, and we could revise the ordinance to allow for it.
I'm a little lost in all this, and I'll be perfectly honest about it, but I'm looking at my notes from that meeting where Commissioner Gay brought up this issue. And to me, it got punted to the city solicitor, because my notes say only for those serving alcohol or both kinds. Glenn needs to review. And then the second thing is does illegal spot zoning prevent us from doing this? And the follow-up is only to Glenn.
Yeah, so I think spot zoning does not prevent you from doing it. I don't think it's spot zoning. And typically spot zoning requires an actual rezoning of a parcel. There's no rezoning here. There's just a change in the zoning laws. As to restaurants serving alcohol, that's an interesting point, because in the restaurant chapter, which is not the zoning chapter, that sets up the idea that if you're going to serve alcoholic beverages, you have to get a permit of compliance from the commissioners. Other restaurants that don't serve alcoholic beverages do not have to get a permit of compliance. Interestingly, in the zoning code, where it deals with dining patios, it does refer to permit of compliances, such that it does lead you to believe that this section only deals with those restaurants that are serving alcohol. And there's already provisions in the zoning code in this dining patio section that refer to permits of compliance. So that's not something new that's been established with this proposed ordinance. So if you wanted to make the zoning code provision less specific to restaurants that serve alcohol and make it a patio ordinance in general, I think you could do that by revising it to take out references to permanent compliance and just set up zoning laws for purposes of dining patios. But it doesn't currently do that. It currently, in the current code and in this draft ordinance, it refers to permanent compliances. So I agree that the current language suggests that it's only applicable to restaurants serving alcohol, which probably goes contrary to the general policy themes that you're dealing with. You probably want if you're going to allow it for an alcohol restaurant, you probably allow it for.
That to me is part of the spot zoning argument.
Well, I don't know that I agree with that in terms of allowing all restaurant facilities. I think it is applicable. I would make it only applicable to those that serve alcohol. We got to remember that with the permanent compliance process allows for and requires a public hearing that therefore allows for public input on whether or not the actions sought, such as utilizing a lot next door, would be allowed or would be favored by the neighbors. So I think that's very important.
So just getting back to spot zoning, the other quote that I pulled is, no one particular characteristic is associated with illegal spot zoning except failure to promote the general welfare or failure to comply with at least the spirit of a comprehensive plan is necessarily fatal to the amendment. So, spot zoning is kind of amorphous and there's no perfect definition of it. But so as a matter of policy, I think that the commissioners have to answer, would this idea of dining patios on adjacent lots promote the general welfare? Or does it somehow not comply with the spirit of the comprehensive plan? If it doesn't promote the general welfare and doesn't comply with the spirit of the comprehensive plan, then at least this quote from, what case is this? This quote from, where's the reference? That's all the way down to 7. I'm sorry, the reference isn't right. But at least that quote suggests that if it's not consistent with the comp plan, and somehow it fails to promote the general welfare. So if you're doing something zoning-wise, and typically it's an actual rezoning, but I suppose it could be just changing a zoning law. If you're doing something that fails to promote the general welfare of the community and is for a specific property, then it's probably spot zoning.
See, this just gets murkier and murkier to me as to trying to take an existing law and manipulate it so that it meets some needs. I compare it to like, you've got a great candidate for the job, so we're gonna take the job description and change it around so it meets all of the qualifications of this individual. And to me, that is the wrong way to approach something. If you've got an individual that you think is great, so let's manipulate the job description so that it suits the abilities of the individual. Again, this comes back to band-aiding, and I think we've been so guilty of doing that for so long, as opposed to take a clean look at what we're really trying to accomplish.
Well, that's the better point, is what are you trying to accomplish? And that is the policy question that I thought the commissioners had answered the first time around, which
Some
was,
have.
which the, right, well, the policy question was, is this an issue of enough interest that you want to explore it further through the development of an ordinance? If you're back to the policy issue of, do I want this or do I not want this? That's a question that probably the commissioners should explore some more, because I can ultimately draft an ordinance that allows for these on abutting properties that I think would withstand any challenge from spot zoning or other type challenges. But if it's a matter of policy, you're not going to ultimately want to allow for this sort of activity, then the exercise of going through the ordinance is probably a waste of everybody's time.
Maybe what we need to resolve today and get from members of the public and ourselves is, do we want to pursue this? I've said before, I found it very appetizing, or maybe I'll start using the word appealing. I find it very appealing to be able to facilitate this because of at least one restaurant that does it now, and a handful of others that would be able to consider doing this. All the time we take codes and amend them. So I don't follow Commissioner Gossett's statement there, but all the time we amend codes to accommodate us and do different things. And I would say that this may or may not be the best wording we have now, but again, if we want it to happen, I do believe that we can address all the concerns and amend it properly. So I don't know that there's any point in talking about some of this in red up there, lines about the affidavit and how to make it work, and the dining patio shall be limited and all that stuff, until we are resolved that we indeed want to invest more time in making this work. So, like, before we go to the public, is there any?
Yeah, I'm sort of perplexed by the whole thing, because you talk about how we make changes in the code, but frankly, that's the problem with the code now, is it's had a lot of one-off changes over the years, and as a result, it's kind of a mess today. And, I see a lot of contradictions potentially in the code by adopting language such as we have today. I understand what Glenn was saying about accessory structure and that it's referred to 14 times. I think the reason it hasn't been, that you haven't seen it with dining patios before, is that at least all of the references that I saw for accessory structure are really on residential property. You don't see it referred to on commercial in our code at all. And I don't know whether that's because of the commercial has 100% lot coverage or what, but you just don't see it referred to. So, it's basically a residential thing in our code. Well, to add a definition here, but then to contradict that definition in the code itself by saying, well, no, we're going to allow it not on the same lot, even though the definition is on the same lot. So, and the same with dining patio. It would seem that you'd have to alter the dining patio definition to account for the fact that you've got something in the code that is a little off from what it is today. But I guess one of the main things, and I was glad to hear Matt Janis say that he does consider it an accessory structure, because it has to be considered something in order to be evaluated by building and licensing. And so when I saw that the wording had been changed to dining patios may exist on a parcel without saying what they exist as, that really confused me, because I didn't know what's the starting point. And I believe Mr. Janis said that the FAR would be considered on the lot that the patio is on, which I would not think that would be the case at all. I would think it would be added to the building, because elsewhere in the code, I think it says that the FAR is inclusive of the building and its accessory structures. So, there are so many places where it contradicts other things in the code, and partly because it's not well defined, but at the same time, I don't know how you define something like this. I would love to know if there are other codes somewhere that allow this kind of thing and how they do it, because I cannot figure out, how to make it fit.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Doesn't, oh, go ahead.
No, please.
No.
I find this very appetizing. And I thought we all did, and that's why we have moved it to this point. And I understand what Commissioner Gay is saying with it needs to be considered something in order for building and licensing to evaluate. I think those are all fair things. But I think in the spirit of us wanting to move this forward and having more outdoor dining, the nuance of it is why we pay Glenn the big bucks to figure out how to write in the code what we want to accomplish. And for me, I want to move this forward. I want to have more outdoor dining. I see absolutely no reason why a empty lot next to a restaurant could not be expanded. And to touch on one thing, I disagree with you, Mayor. I understand the value in that permit of compliance and giving the public an opportunity to weigh in when we're doing this, but I think it's incredibly unfair to say that this is only applicable to restaurants that serve alcohol. I think it should be any restaurant without regard to whether they have a liquor license or not. So I'm happy to see this move forward. I want to see it move forward. So that's where I am with with it.
Thank you. And I'd like to clarify, why I'm saying right at this moment that it should only apply to restaurants that serve alcohol is because they do have that permanent compliance process for restaurants which are going to serve alcohol, which allows for public hearing, which allows for the public to, if we wanted other restaurants that don't serve alcohol to partake of this, then that would be fine, provided there's a public hearing section, because whether you serve alcohol or not, there's potential for excessive noise. Commissioner LaGree, and then back to Commissioner Gossett.
I have a question on number 19B. Are we done with 4, or what's the?
Line number 19?
No, section 270, 19B. And it's on number 1, the gross area devoted to dining purposes, limited to 750 square feet. I too want to know what we're trying to accomplish and how that 750 square feet plays into that. And number 2, have we talked to any restaurant owners? Maybe they're happy with 750. I just don't know, nor do I know why that particular limitation is in there. I can understand 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but I sure don't understand why 1 is in there. If it's for...
Remember that our very next topic is to talk about that 750 square feet.
But that's where you were headed. But no, we're still back on 4. Okay.
Yeah, but we will be addressing the 750, and that's very, very, very important. In fact, if this went forward, I would probably reverse the discussion at future meetings, reverse them, so that the 750 square feet. Why? Because if we agreed to this, using abutting properties, I am amenable to it, provided the code amendments are acceptable. However, I would not be amenable if we went to unlimited size, or we went to a certain size above 750. So I think the 750 is tantamount. We have to address that. But just be aware, you can finish your comments, but again, that's our very next topic.
No, I wanted you to finish whatever you're on right now.
Yeah. Mayor,
I think we're still on accessory structures, maybe, I don't know.
I think we're at a point where we need to decide whether we're moving this forward or not. Clearly, the mayor and I have said we're for it. I think Commissioner Gay and Gossett have reservations. I think we need to have a consensus on whether we're moving this forward, and the rest of this is irrelevant if we're not.
Thank you. Let's go back to Commissioner Gossett. Then we'll get to the members of the public.
Yeah, just one follow-up to the building official. We also, part of our code, I believe, talks about one building per lot. So in doing this, if we allow this to happen on an abutting lot, does that cause a merger of the lot by use, as we've defined that previously? And does that then, we have two buildings on a lot? I'm curious how that would, what your thoughts are, or have you even thought about that direction?
I can give my thoughts if you, yeah.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't think it would effectuate
I'm
it.
asking the building official.
Sure.
He'd probably ask me. It's probably what would happen.
Well, that's my question is, you're the one that interprets it, you're the one that receives these applications, so how would you approach it?
So I would not consider the lots merged, only by use, I think is probably how I would consider that.
It's a
But
restaurant
we
using
would-
it all, right?
I think we would stipulate that in the ordinance, should we draft it to be that way, we would definitely need to speak to it in the ordinance.
But that's not referenced in the ordinance currently, right?
I do not believe so.
So you can't have merger by use unless the lots are in common ownership, and these by definition are not in common ownership. And I think in the certification where the owner certifies if the restaurant owner or that lot owner is permitted to put the dining patio on their lot, I think that affidavit would probably say, and by the way, nothing here is merging these lots. My lot is separate, and the city's record should reflect the same. So I understand the idea, and it gets murky, but again, I think that's a thing that it wouldn't, by operation of law, merge because you have to have common ownership. But I can see how it could be viewed as an accessory use over here, an accessory structure over here, that somehow connects those lots, and it does.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it would effectuate an actual merger.
Well, if we continue the discussions, I think it would also be useful to have that affidavit that's referred to in the code. If it's going to be supplied by the city, then we need to make sure it's worded the way we need it to be worded from the beginning.
Yeah, again, I'm not opposed to this, but if I'm coming to apply for this, I just don't see a clear path as to the attorney, the building inspector, and the applicant. It's like, well, this or maybe that, or we got to think of this, or it just is not an easy application. And I think that's one of the major complaints we hear from anybody that applies here. It's like, well, the code is so complicated, I can't figure this out. I got to get my attorney to talk to your attorney. And again, it's even if we move this forward, I don't believe with regards to having a permanent compliance hearing, et cetera, none of this is going to really happen until after the season, October or November. And so if anybody wants to get prepared for outdoor dining, it'll be next season. So I just feel that there's a lot more work to be done on this. Again, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to this, but it's just very murky as the questions are just coming up right here. So.
I mean, only one response I can give to that, and again, I'm not promoting or demoting this ordinance. I don't have a vote. I was asked to put something together, and here it is. But the one thing that might give you some comfort is that because these are such exceptional circumstances, and it's not something that repeats over and over and over, you will have the permanent compliance hearing. So this is an entirely discretionary function of the commissioners. You can deny these or approve them at that permanent compliance hearing. You're not obligated to approve them. This is, again, a discretionary act on your part. So if something comes in and you say, that's not what we were thinking of, and that does not promote the general welfare of the community, you can deny them.
Well, let me ask you a question, though. Isn't the permit of compliance usually at the end of the process? The thing is already built and ready to open before the permit of compliance comes in?
No. Per the code, for the permit of compliance, it can be totally on paper.
Right, but
But it doesn't have to be.
But it often comes to us, in other words, I'm looking at the beginning of the process, how it's evaluated from the beginning, not the permit of, it seems like by the time it comes to permit of compliance, it's already set up.
Sometimes, but I think about, this may not be the perfect example, but think about the agave application. I mean, that came to you before there was a stick in the dirt.
Yeah.
So it can come at the front end.
Okay. I guess one question I have, do you know of any existing codes that have this kind of allowance, this kind of structure, because I would sure love to see how it works in real life and in practice somewhere.
Yeah, I don't have a good example. I can certainly look for them.
I would like to see that, yeah, I'd love to see how others do it, because I think there are too many places of conflict right now.
And Solicitor, you had mentioned earlier about the definitions between accessory structure and accessory building. So if I'm going to expand my patio to a abutting lot that I don't own, but I got a certificate that says that I can do this for a period, and then I construct this patio, and it also, by code of ABCC, has to have a 42-inch barrier around it to enclose it, et cetera, et cetera. Does that barrier become a structure or a building, or how does, or if I put a service stand out there with a computer and a registrar, I'm just kind of getting through this. Is that a building, or is that structure, or where does that fall? How does that work?
Good questions. It's probably a structure of some sorts. I don't know that it would be termed a building. Again, it's something that Matt and I would have to work through, depending on what they're proposing to construct.
Yeah, I think it would ultimately be determined as associated use. So it would be an accessory structure with a required railing in that circumstance. So it would be just an associated use with that, with that accessory use, so an accessory structure, if you will.
Okay. So again, we'll have to figure through this, we'll have to walk through it, and again, that's part of planning and what have you, but just as an applicant, it just seems it's still very murky. And again, I'm not, as Commissioner Chernowski said, I'm not against the spirit of this, but we just keep falling over ourselves to try to make this happen, and it's like, oh yeah, but what about? And I know the perfect is the enemy of the good, or however that works, but there's just so much here that is questionable. So anyway, I'd like to see this proceed, but I just don't think we have a very clear path ahead of us with this.
Well, I'm hearing that some commissioners would maybe like to proceed, but I'm not convinced that we wouldn't be spinning our wheels. I'm just not Commissioner Gossett. Did anybody else want to say something? Commissioner Sharp?
I guess I have a clarification, and Commissioner Gossett just used the word I was going to, which is, what is the spirit of this for our businesses? And I'm trying to take the 10,000-foot view of, does it help them make things easier, more clear, provide a new opportunity for their business? How do we articulate the spirit for the businesses and the spirit for the surrounding areas, which gets me very uneasy? Can someone do that and help me on this?
Well, I'd look at it as it gives the restaurants extra opportunity to expand their business while also protecting the neighboring area, community, by way of the permanent compliance that gives them the opportunity to speak up and give feedback. I think I guess what frustrates me is that if the restaurant at the beginning of the town had the neighboring property of the same ownership, we wouldn't even be talking about any of this. But you look out there and visibly you see something, you can't tell whether it's of different ownership or the same ownership whatsoever. And because it's in a different ownership, and it could even be a situation where Stan and Marcia own Lot A, but Stan owns only Lot B, and it's the same people, but it's called different ownership. And so we would be disallowing them to do it. I just can't understand why we wouldn't want the opportunity to be passed on to certain restaurants that have a budding property next door, especially if it's in different ownership, to work out something through a lease agreement and the code to have that ability to do that.
And I hear exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate that kind of characterization. I guess what gives me a little bit of pause is with the potential for redevelopment around our city, it makes me a little uneasy that I am not an attorney and I am not completely clear on, I completely grasp what you're saying about situations that exist today. What I'm having a little trouble with is, okay, what could it look like after sales have happened or different arrangements have happened? Are we doing something that would have implications that I can't even fathom at this point?
You're asking unintended consequences. There certainly could be. I can't see any right now. I just can't see any. And if they
Okay.
do come up, then you address them at the time. I think you do everything you can to try to anticipate and address and try to avoid unintended consequences, but there's no foolproof system.
Well, and I reflect back on what Mr. Janis had expressed previously, which is seeing more and more, whether it's in residential or possibly commercial, more and more of the trend toward outdoor. And I think that's a good thing. And if the spirit of this is what we believe it to be, then I'm leaning toward continuing on and trying to move this forward.
Thank you. Anybody else before we go over to the public?
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that. The reality is that the opportunities that exist now with a handful of places, there's not going to be more opportunities with vacant lots next to other places. That's not going to happen more often. It's going to happen less often. So as redevelopment happens throughout the city, this opportunity to expand on abutting lots is going to diminish. This is going to decrease over time.
So take me one step further, if you would. How do you know that?
Who's going to clear a lot to have a dining patio on it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm not a developer. But if that's the case, then that's helpful to me, that the anticipation is that it would be less rather than more. Okay.
But the scenario you just outlined, it'll be less, also brings up the question, and I don't know what the city's role in this is what happens in a change of ownership? There's an empty lot next door, it gets sold halfway through the year, the restaurant has an agreement to have the patio on it. What happens?
That's a private issue between those two.
Not when the city has given them a permit of compliance, it's not a private issue. That's what I'm saying. The city shouldn't be involved in those transactions, but with this kind of a deal, we absolutely would be.
I
Depending
disagree.
on how it's worded. I'm assuming that maybe that would be taken care of in the affidavits or whatever, but that is definitely an issue, that the rights of the owner, the rights of the restaurant owner could conflict with the rights of the property owner at some point, and then what is the city's role in that?
Right, so the permits of compliance generally run with the land, so if a new owner takes over an existing restaurant that has a permit of compliance, that permit of compliance remains in place. So I think that this would be very similar, but there'd have to be some notice. I mean, I was thinking that probably we'd have to record the affidavit or something. So an unassuming buyer would get notice when they go to buy the property that, hey, it's subject to this permit of compliance. So that's another, so to Commissioner Sharp's point, yeah, there will, I can promise you there will be unintended consequences. And there is with every ordinance that you do. It's the legislative balancing act that you all try to accomplish, which is there enough benefit on this side that I'm willing to risk some of the unintended consequences on this side? In his world, in a perfect world, you all would say in the residential district, you can have one house of 3,000 square feet, one garage, one driveway, one sidewalk, period. And then that makes his job easy. So in his world, right? But you're trying to do things that promote the general welfare, promote the general health. If this is one of those things, and you say this is so good for the restaurant community and for the dining public that you're willing to take that risk to make it happen, then go for it. If you can't find that benefit, then probably you shouldn't do it.
Well, and I'm so glad you framed it that way, because it is the risk reward.
Right.
That
I think.
I get bogged down in language rather than a discussion about risk reward.
Right.
You know, I don't want to be a party to something that starts nothing but angst and criticism from our residential areas. And I'm trying to pull out very painfully for me and everybody else, what would that be that this could allow that we should anticipate before we decide, is all I'm trying to say,
I understand.
if that makes any sense.
It does.
Mayor, I think you very simply put this eloquently. If this was the same ownership, a lot next to a restaurant, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. So it's the nuances that some of us are grasping for, reasons not to do this, that are perplex me, because if it was the same ownership, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And they would be able to expand on that property, and the building and licensing department would handle it just fine.
Well, just to be clear on this, I'm pressing on this point not to find a reason not to go forward. I want to find reasons that make sense to me so that I can make an informed decision. Yeah. That's all. I'm not leaning one way or the other. I want clear, concise information so that it makes sense to me, and I don't wind up with egg on my face, as is sometimes the case.
Thank you. Any other comment up here before we go to the public?
Just one
Mr.
other,
Gossett?
address this to the solicitor. Has there been any other indication, or I'm just curious, because we're dealing also with ABCC in this, would if you could find this out from them, would the ABCC grant a license to two different ownerships?
I think the answer is yes, and the reason I say that is because we know that it exists at least with Chesapeake and Maine and Dogfish. There's one license there, and they're separately owned parcels, but there's one license. So I think that this is something the ABC would accommodate.
Well,
Was that a special carve-out when that was done?
It was not a special, nothing the commissioners had to do as a special carve-out. The ABC commissioner at the time allowed it for whatever reason. I don't think legislatively they had to do anything state-wise for it.
Thanks.
Anybody else up here? If not, members of the public, if you would like to say anything, would you come forward and state your name and your relationship to the city, please?
Hi, Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I look for places that have outdoor dining. I think we should do everything we can to support outdoor dining. I don't think this pandemic is going to go away anytime soon, and I just think we need to do what we can to benefit the restaurants. I do think there should be a way for a restaurant that doesn't serve alcohol to do this also. I don't know that we have many of those that have night businesses where they don't serve alcohol, but we may have breakfast places that don't serve alcohol, and they should be able to do this. And I, too, and I've said it in the past, to me the ownership really shouldn't matter. It's the legal agreement that that restaurant has with that property owner that should carry weight. And that's why I think an affidavit is great, and that shows the city that there is some type of an agreement there. But I think we should do anything we can to support outdoor dining.
Thank you, Carolyn. Does your husband, he's with you, does he agree or negate your opinion? No, we don't know. Well, thank you very much. You know, the topic, while Carol's coming up, the topic of should restaurants that don't serve alcohol, I think is an interesting topic. What I'd like to suggest, though, is that we resolve this with restaurants that serve alcohol and then take that out, because that's a whole different topic that goes back to 270-19. It's a much bigger topic. Carol, if you would identify yourself and your relationship to the city.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Dewey Beach, Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure you're not surprised, but I support the outdoor dining. I liked the comment that was made for use only. So
Well, I'll say that again.
that the merger be allowed for use only. So in other words, you're not transferring the property. You're just, it's associated use. And definitely There's no doubt that we have heard nothing but good things about the outdoor dining from the residents, from the visitor, from the business community. So anything you can do to make this happen, we support.
Thank you, Carol. Any other members of the public like to speak on this topic? Hearing none, we'll return it to the commissioners. I suggest that one path forward, since we haven't heard from everybody, but one path forward would be to have Glenn continue with this, make some modifications. I would suggest perhaps bringing this back to the next regular meeting of the commissioners, because that allows us to review it, see what's been updated. And at that point, it gives us the opportunity, because it's a regular voting meeting, to vote whether to continue or not at that time. Because again, I don't think any of us wants to waste time. And if we're not moving forward, then some of us may choose to cut the bait. So that's one thing, if we can have something done in 2 weeks.
We could, Mayor. There's a couple of notes that I took that I would need a little more direction on. One of them being whether the commissioners want to, since Mr. Janis has said that, yes, this is an accessory structure, do you want the ordinance to specifically refer to it as an accessory structure and then keep this definition of accessory structure in the ordinance, maybe with some modifications to make clear that the dining patio provision is an exception to the general definition of accessory structure? That's one question. Second, we didn't talk at all about location on the lot or elevation issues. If you want to leave it as the dining patio definition currently is, which says it has to be abutting the restaurant and can be raised, we can just leave that alone. But if there's some specific height limitations that you'd want, I'd need the policy direction on that.
Again, Glenn, to conserve time, I would say the lines in red 63 to 66 don't need to be addressed, that we can address those, provided at the next meeting we are generally happy with the updates and are amenable to moving forward, then we can address them. Otherwise, we're spinning our wheels. Any further comment from the commissioners? So we have a path forward. We'll put that on our next regular meeting as noted. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to go to second item, old business B. Discuss whether or not to amend Municipal Code 270-19 use restrictions specific to the 750 square foot gross area size limitation on outdoor dining patios for restaurants. I believe Commissioners Chernowski and Bennett were interested in this topic, or at least questioned where the size limits came from. Ann, I know you did some research on 750 square feet. I'm going to ask you in a minute to see if you did any research on that and have any input on where the 750 square foot limit come from. This is the second visit to this topic. And again, for me, it marries into where I'm going and what I would be amenable to in the previous topic. So this is very important. And again, because this is within 270-19 use restrictions, it is a zoning code change that would have to be voted on to go to resolution, then would have to conduct a public hearing to be able to have that change. So the public would have that opportunity to weigh in on this in addition to coming to meetings. So I think that's very important. Also, because it's within 270-19 zoning use restrictions, it does apply to restaurants that serve alcohol only at this point. So with that, I'd like to, I'll see if I can bring it up. This is 270-19 within the zoning, and of course the yellow highlight is the topic du jour. And you and Linda did some research on 750 square feet. Did you all have any luck in identifying any rationale for that 750 square foot? Nothing. All right. So Nobody else did research on it, so,
I also actually looked
Yeah.
through the October 1990 minutes all the way through the December 1991 minutes, and there was no specific discussions about the 750, where that came from. There was discussion on many other options, but nothing really at the 750. The size of restaurants at one time was looked at as a larger size, but there was no specific discussion in any of the minutes about where the 750 came from. There was a moratorium put into place for 6 months to discuss the subject, but there was no specific action within the minutes of where that 750 came from.
You know, the size limits on restaurant have evolved over the years. If you recall, the last thing that we did was to put in some changes that allowed for restaurants to have more storage space, more freezer space. And that was approved, I think, unanimously by the commissioners. I think one of the rationales given was that it could help the restaurant with fewer deliveries. That if they can store more on the premises, there would be fewer deliveries. Did not expand, by my recollection, did not expand any of the seating area, the dining area, but it did expand and did not count some of the areas of your bathrooms and your foyers and your hallways and your storage areas and the entirety of your basement, if you will, whereas previous to that code amendment, it did make the change. Recently, we have made some change, minor, but some change to size limitations in restaurants by allowing outdoor dining on public space. We did not set any limits on there, other than through the dimensional requirements for outdoor dining. You know, either a 6-foot deep section in front of your building or an 8-foot deep section, provided, of course, that you have a minimum pedestrian pathway there that's dictated by code. So this, you know, is of interest to me. Whether I have an appetite for it or not depends on several things. One is that we don't know. Somebody questioned where this came from, and obviously we've just answered that. We don't know where it came from. So absent that, what I have to do is look at my knowledge of 750 square feet. I've been here 24 years. The foundation for me going and eating at other restaurants is knowing that they have been 750 square foot maximum. That's my foundation. I think it has worked fine. And yet I have been amenable, I think I stated at a previous meeting, that I have been amenable to considering that maybe it could be a little bigger. I absolutely talked against going to unlimited size restrictions at the previous meeting, and that's because of looking at some of these restaurants out there that exist now that have outdoor parking areas. And the thought and the vision of those being converted 100% or 90%, 50, whatever, to dining areas was just disconcerting to me that they could do that. My first thought was that, well, I might be willing to go to 900 square feet, go a little bigger. Incremental steps, I think, would be prudent if we go to change it. And yet, my biggest holdback is 24 years here with knowing the amount of noise or that comes from these things, that if you go bigger, it's definitely going to be more noise. It's just, it happens, even whether there's music or not. Of course, the music's not allowed, but on outdoor patios. But the din, it's just a fact of life that you have an outdoor dining patio, that the number of people talking in 750 square feet is going to be eclipsed by the number of people talking in 900 square feet or bigger or unlimited. And the other thing that comes to mind is what it takes to enforce the noise code. and those that are illegally playing music. It's very hard to enforce. And we know that. We went through years of analysis of using the decibel meter to control noise. And then in lieu of that, substituting subjective noise controls. But many of us know that that is very hard to control and enforce. And so do we really want to go into something offering more space, bigger space, when we have a hard time controlling it? And we have some establishments, singular or plural, that still aren't in compliance and play music against in contravention of 270-19. And so I'm hesitating really to consider any expansion until we can get the noise under control and we get these restaurants to willingly comply with the code. That's my spiel.
Mayor, could you expand on something a little bit, if you can? The issue that you just raised about enforcement and noise, if you say get that under control, what would we need to do differently than what we're doing now if indeed it is not in control?
Well, you know, honestly, I'm not sure we can get it in control 100%, because enforcement is very challenging. You have to be out there at the time of the music, and yet I've heard complaints about establishments where the music is too loud. And it's not just that the music is too loud, it's that the music's not allowed. 270-19 says there shall be no live entertainment on the dining patio. There shall be no external speakers or amplifiers on the dining patio, and no internal speakers from the premises are to be directed to the dining patio. And
Why can't we enforce that?
that we can.
Okay.
And I think should. That's our law. That's what we abide. That's what we have created.
Do we? Do we actually enforce that? I hear a lot from constituents about enforcement, so I'm just curious if we actually enforce this.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And certainly there are some establishments that are repeat offenders, and we follow up with those individuals and make contact with them.
And what is our recourse with repeat offenders?
I believe there's a civil citation associated with it. I would have to check.
I mean, this is one of those things that to me that maybe you can inform me. Do we reach out to Main Street? Because these kinds of issues, I'll just put it very simply. If we have businesses that are not really cooperating with things that they are aware of, I understand if they're not aware, but if they are aware of it, isn't there an old adage about you're going to ruin it for everybody? And so when I hear this kind of discussion layered on top of should we expand something, I take a very dim view of the expansion if we're not in really a strong situation with what we currently have, if I'm making any sense.
I think that's an excellent point there. You know, if Main Street and Chamber were to hear this conversation and to hear that perhaps the mayor and anybody else was considering expansion, but hesitated because of the non-compliance of certain restaurants, I would think that and hope that they reach out and start policing their own industry.
Well, I'll be the first one to say, we've got our liaison to Main Street here, and we've got our chamber leadership here, and I'm the first one, I think I've already said it. I take a very dim view of being asked to increase something if we're not getting cooperation from what we have. There has to be skin in the game. Or, I think I learned this in kindergarten, you're going to ruin it for everybody.
And I think most businesses agree with that.
Okay.
And want their fellow businesses to be respectful of the rules and to play fair and not ruin it for everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to relay this conversation to Main Street. I will say, when it comes to noise I'm not aware of specific situations that may be happening right now, but one of the noisiest places that would echo throughout the town was an indoor establishment, and so it's not just outdoor patios that are making noise. It's certainly other businesses as well. And the one that I'm thinking of is no longer in town, but I mean, yeah, noise. Yeah, it's coming from other establishments too, just not the outdoor.
Yeah, I'll play devil's advocate. The biggest offender is the bandstand. I hear the music in my backyard, and I'm probably a mile away. I hear it every weekend. I don't hear people talking from restaurants.
Well, and I'll play the other devil's advocate. I hear a particular restaurant. I live on Silver Lake, and I hear their music. It's not the bandstand.
Right. No, but so my point is, though, if we can't say we don't want restaurants to do this, yet we support the bandstand polluting the airways as well.
And I take your point on that. Yeah.
And Funland.
And what? I'm sorry.
Funland.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that analogy, but that would be a different topic. Right now, we're focusing on restaurants and restaurant sizes, so.
But it goes back to those unintended consequences that we spoke of earlier, is that, oh, it's okay to do this, and we have lots of buts and ifs. And you know.
We continue to build that list.
Yeah.
Well, Mayor, I'd just like to say that I certainly have questioned the 750 square feet and the rationale behind that, and would love to see outdoor dining expanded. And it's because of the desire of not that it benefits the businesses, but it's the desire of residents and visitors that want to eat outside. That I want to see it expanded and give more opportunities for that desire to be fulfilled.
Thank you. Anybody else up here before we go to the public?
Well, has anybody looked into the options that were discussed at a previous meeting about having an alternative be the number of people seated? Because the idea was to spread them out, and that was why there might be a desire to have more than 750 square feet, but they wouldn't actually be cramming huge numbers of people into that. And I'm not suggesting that we change the code. I'm suggesting that perhaps there's an alternative, that it could be 750 square feet or, you know, X number of people, whichever is less, more, I don't know.
Yeah, let me address that. What's Commissioner Gay's talking about is an alternative to the 750 square feet maximum. 750 square feet is a definitive area that's within a barrier. An alternative suggested by the owner of Missy of Egg, I believe it was especially related to the COVID section, to better social distance, to convert that 750 square feet into count the number of chairs in it, which I did at one time is say average of 60 chairs, and allow the 60 chairs in an unlimited or some kind of specified area so that you can spread out again. And actually building and licensing and the city manager analyzed that and disfavored that. So I let it drop, frankly, that they like it much better within a definitive barrier that's easier to keep track of. Do you want to say anything, or is that?
No, Mayor, I believe that sums it up perfectly.
Okay.
Mayor,
I have considered that is a dead issue, yeah.
Mayor, I just have one clarification for Commissioner Gossett. Did I actually hear you say you went all the way back to October of 1990 in the minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And did I also understand you to say that there was no clarity on the 750 issue?
Correct, there's
So,
a lot of,
so I guess what I'm trying to figure out, what did they talk about for 6 months?
they talked,
That may be a stupid question, but what did they talk about?
Oh, you know, those
I
commissioners.
can ask you the same question.
Well, watch it, Tony Bennett over there.
they talked about noise, they talked about hours of operation. That was primarily the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
But as we're, just on that reminder, we talked about live entertainment on the dining patio in our code. Just as a reminder that those issues, no bar on the patio, no external speakers or amplifiers, the dining patio, internal speakers pointed out, all of those comes from ABCC code. So that the city, actually this is where it all originated. In 1991, House Bill 95 was passed to outline this, to give the municipalities more ability to regulate. At that point in time, we had even no definition for restaurants. So that was the majority of the discussion, was defining what a restaurant is, what a bar is, this type of thing. So that is the time that this existed. And there was discussion and work between the legislature and the commissioners at that period of time to establish that, okay, if we, the city, enforce what the ABC is doing, then you can have the ability to issue the permit of compliance. So if I don't know how that we could make any changes in it, live entertainment, outside speakers, dining, this kind of, that affects directly back to the ABCC licensing. So I don't know that we could make any changes in those.
Well, and again, I'm not sure we were headed that way, you know.
No, I'm just saying that, but we have a problem with
If
enforcement. We're talking
noise
about
came
noise.
up and we pursued that, I'll be upfront with you. Commissioner Sargent, back in his day, thought that restaurants that have live music inside, any music inside, should have their doors shut and their windows closed. And so if we get to that point, I would be willing to sponsor something like that, so that we don't have to listen to it down the street, across the block, 10 blocks away, et cetera. So is there any other comment on this topic of 750 square feet before we go to the public?
I was the one who brought this up, and I have not yet heard an answer that satisfies my question. Why do we have this? And now I think I hear from Commissioner Gossett that neither does the liquor rules and regulations have anything like this. I've heard the mayor circle it and go back and forth and across it, but I haven't heard why we have it or what good it's doing. Maybe it's doing a lot of good and I just don't know about it. One thing I wish we could have done somewhere along the way is ask the restaurant people what they think about it. We haven't done that yet. I wish we could. Maybe they don't care. Maybe 750 square feet is meaningless to them. But I think I did hear one complaint. But is it valid? And why do we have this? If we want to take the risk away, let's stop all outdoor patio. Then you'll have no risk. You'll have nobody worrying about outdoor patio noise. Because the people like it. It's a wonderful thing. And I want us to have it. I just don't know why we have this 750 square feet and I can't find an answer. And if there's no reason for it, get rid of it. I don't care, whatever. But there may be a great reason. Have we asked Main Street, have we asked the Chamber of Commerce what their thoughts are on this? Answer is, you say yes, Mayor.
No, I'm nodding to Carol if she wants to speak. Yeah, in all my years, 14 years on council, I don't think I've ever had one restaurant come to me asking to expand it until we had Somewhere Restaurant recently. Now, they're a unique situation. If you have to know their situation, and that's because they have a minimal interior dining area that doesn't really meet current requirements, and yet they've been there forever, if you will, or that building's been a restaurant forever. And then they have their outdoor porch considered, defined as an outdoor dining patio, which is competing with their true outdoor dining patio to the right of it. So they've got a unique situation, but it's resolvable by going to the Board of Adjustment, perhaps, if there was a favorable response there. So, no, I haven't heard from any others, but again, as I stated, I would disagree with you, of course, based on my point of view articulated earlier, that in 24 years here, I think 750 square feet has worked fine.
Well, and we did hear from Megan Key and Joe, I can't think of his last name.
Maggio.
Yes, about their desire, if possible, for flexibility for some type of expansion.
Did we? Okay.
Yes, we did. The last time we talked about this.
Yeah, I too am aware of that situation, and I'm not happy with ordinance by variance, but that would be a way to resolve if a person wanted to use more than 750 square feet, they could go and get a variance. But I don't like that.
That's the same option that the person has to a lot on a budding. They could go
That's
to Board
true
of
too,
Adjustments.
Commissioner Gossett. It's very true. So we're
Don't have to manipulate the code to meet individual requirements when they have a sense of relief, the Board of Adjustments. Anyway.
I would like to hear what restaurant owners think about it, other than just the one. Could we hear from?
We'll go to the
Carol
members of the
Everhart.
public. Carol, come on up. If you don't mind, again, identify yourself and your relationship to the city.
Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach Chamber of Commerce. Believe it or not, I came to the chamber in 1989, and I remember those meetings because I was here. It really began because of noise. There was a large restaurant in town that there was a lot of noise emanating from, and at that time, they thought by reducing the size and coming up with a square footage size, they would also address the noise. And there was a lot of conflict going back and forth between whether to use, meter, whether to use, you can hear it with your ear, how many feet. It went back and forth for quite a few meetings, but the chief might not remember more than I do. But it was because of a particular restaurant that was large in size and was emanating a lot of noise. That's why that started. So that's that connection there. And as far as how the restaurants feel, I've not done a survey on that particular, square footage, so I really don't want to speak to that. I'd be happy to run that survey and see what comes back. But I think there's a desire, depending on the restaurant, depending on its location, whether or not they want to increase their size. Okay.
Thank you, Carol. While we're on the members of the public, anybody else would like to speak on this topic? Go ahead. Identify, the routine. Identify yourself and your relationship to the
Carolyn
city.
Diefendorfer, city resident. I think there's other, again, the 750, where'd it come from? I think you could address it by maybe allowing up to a certain percentage on an adjacent property. I mean, you have 100% coverage on your commercial property, correct? When you go to an abutting property, maybe you limit it to a certain percentage. If you want to go, 25% would get them to maybe get them to 1,000 square feet if it's a 5,000 square foot piece of property next door. I think you could do something like that. The other thing I would say is maybe you give them a maximum time that they can be, like they have to be closed down 9 o'clock, whatever. Their last seating for dinner is at 8:45 or something, that you're not continuing to have people come in. You might be able to address the noise that way a little bit. But there's noise problems everywhere. I mean, in the residential area, there are noise problems at rental houses that have pools in the backyard. But I think a lot of them know that they have to be quiet at a certain time. And There's one across the street from us where 10 o'clock at night, it's like the lights went off because everybody goes inside and it quiets down. So I do think you can give them parameters to operate under.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think it's, frankly, it's unrealistic to ask the restaurant, or to assume that the restaurants will adhere to the noise code. It's just, expanding is gonna exacerbate it. That's, to me, is a fact of life. And your mention of percentages things is an interesting thing. However, we're beyond that conversation of abutting properties. You know, if we wanted to go back to that, and if that passed, and we wanted to do that, that would be certainly one way. But otherwise, the easiest thing is to pick one maximum square footage and say where, because remember, this is defining outdoor dining patio, which is specifically on private property right now. Or if we adopt that other change for abutting property, it would be outdoor dining on private property and on abutting property, if we get that far. But thank you very much. Anybody else? Dave, let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mayor. Dave Diefendorfer, city resident. Just like I mentioned in the last, I agree with, I like the outdoor dining, and I would encourage a possible raising of the square footage. The one thing I mentioned last week, being a licensed professional fire safety engineer, you could make a calculation, and Matt could make it. I don't have my life safety code here with me. It might help you guys determine the size you want by the number of people. So right now, 750. Say it's I don't know what it's 20 people, because there's the tables have to have a certain distance or whatever. So now you have an idea of how many people 750 square feet can hold. So if you made a calculation to 1,000 square feet, it might give you a frame of reference that, hey, that bumps it to 40 people, or, you don't know how loud that's going to be, but it might give you some frame of reference, because 750 square feet, I'm sure everybody sitting here can't tell you how many people that is. I don't know myself. So you might.
I've mentioned it many times before. My calculations, excuse me, using Soho's, which is 740 square feet, is 660 tables. The last permit of compliance we did for Drift, is that the old seafood shack? Yeah. Is Drift? Right. They have a front patio and a back patio, but anyhow, you add that together and you double it, it comes to approximately 750 square feet, about 60 tables.
Okay, well, the mayor can. So if you make that calculation, it might help you at some kind of framing the number of people. Maybe it won't, but that was just my suggestion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Did you say 60 people? That gives each person a 3 by 4.
60 seats.
60 seats? That gives, well, that's
not the number of
60
tables,
chairs.
it's the number of seats, because you can have a table for 6, table for 4. If they had tables for 10, they might be able to squeeze in more people, because there would be fewer aisles, right? So there's no perfect formula. Anybody else from the public? Well, I'm not getting a good feeling or consensus that.
Say again?
I'm not getting a good feeling or consensus that it should even be changed. And so I'm trying to figure out the direction to go from here. Remember, this is a zoning change.
Yeah. I personally would like to hear from restaurant owners.
And the next step would, for us, beyond hearing more opinion, would be to then vote on a resolution to go to public hearing. I don't think we're there yet, just like.
There's something I think we shouldn't lose sight of, but I also have a question. Did we make it, remind me now, we've done so many things related to outdoor dining. Is it a permanent arrangement about the on city property, the tables in the front, abutting the front facade? Is that a permanent arrangement?
That is.
Not just a pandemic
Is that code
arrangement?
or policy? It's policy.
No, but it is permanent. It doesn't have an end date, correct?
It has, in the policies written that we'll review it in October at the regular meeting.
Okay, all right.
So at that time, I would hope to review it, critique it, make some changes if we want to continue with it, and then seek to codify it.
Okay, because.
Because codifying means we would take it back and reintroduce the permit of compliance process.
Correct.
Right.
Which we have suspended temporarily.
I mean, I just think so we've already taken a big step toward expanding outdoor dining with that. You know, I don't know how many square feet it is, but
Right.
we've taken that step. So
Yes, we
I
have.
don't want to lose sight of that. And if it works well, then that will become something we have in the code.
Well, again, for the reasons I stated, I'm willing to just leave it alone.
Yeah.
You know, and just a reminder, we have over 40 patios existing in the city already. So, I mean, it's not something that it's the first time it's happening, so. And that was established in 1991, so over 30 years. We've got 40 patios in place.
So do you want to keep this alive? Do we want to sunset it?
Sunset the discussion. I'm only one vote, and I want to hear from restaurant owners. So you go ahead and go forward.
I agree. I'd like to see this go
I
forward.
think what we're going to hear from restaurant owners, sure, I want to expand my business. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer.
If they say no,
But most of
I
them
wanna know
probably
why.
can't, because they've already used
I mean,
this space.
do you want to expand your business? No, I don't want to, thank you. I'm sorry, you know,
It's,
let's
can
figure
you
out how
live
to
with
ask the
this?
question.
Can you live with the 750 square feet? I think the one issue that we're talking about has decided they can live with it. The one restaurant that I know about, but
Well, I
I
mean,
just don't know why it was here.
you know, it's no fault of the individual restaurants, but my experience of this season, trying to get service that's, you know, in a restaurant, either patio or indoors, they're stretched so thin right now. So to add seats, and I think we also heard from one of the restaurants here that, you know, she had the opportunity to expand, but she could only open one area because she didn't have enough staff and the kitchen wouldn't supply it. So it was a choice between. You know, we're in a very unique situation with COVID. People are still uncomfortable, some of them dining inside. The issue of supply line and the cost of food and the cost of labor. I think right now we should just leave it as is and perhaps investigate this at a later time.
Well, let's review the path forward, because it presents some challenges to me as the chair. Path forward with using the abutting property of different ownership. We've said will be in, 2 weeks or so, in front of us at a voting meeting so that we can decide whether to go forward or not. If you recall earlier, I expressed my challenge with taking a final vote or something on that until we've resolved the 750 square foot. And so if we're going to postpone discussion, and which I don't disagree with, you know, to see from restaurants what their opinions is, to me, we need to resolve that at some point. Now, maybe it's not a contradiction. Maybe we can still, at the regular meeting, discuss and potentially vote on whether to go forward or not with that, and that has nothing to do with the 750 square feet. So why don't we proceed that way? So that would be at our next regular voting meeting. To give restaurants time, I'd really like this topic to be on the next workshop meeting, which would be August. Does that sit well with everybody?
When you say this topic, which one are you referring
This,
to?
the 750, the maximum square footage of an outside dining area on private property. Private in quotes, because we don't know whether that might eventually apply to abutting property of different ownership or not. Do you see a desire to accelerate this and put it on the regular voting meeting also? I don't know how much is on our plate for the regular meeting right now. That's the only reason I hesitate. We'll put it on the August workshop meeting. unless I change my mind in the meantime.
There you go.
All right, any other comments? Thank you to the public that spoke on this. Thank you, commissioners. That ends the old business, item B. We'll move on to new business. New business A is discuss the acceptance of the J.J. Stein Foundation's assets to be maintained in a fiduciary fund for Beach Patrol member scholarships. City Manager, you want to introduce this any further?
Sure, Mayor, thank you. We were approached quite some time ago regarding a request from Diane Stein to maintain a beach patrol scholarship fund that would be used to give essentially financial scholarships to lifeguards. So we have had several conversations with her, as well as internally with Glenn and Bert, who is here, Finance Director. So at this point, I would turn it over to Bert to just provide a recap in terms of what we're presenting to you today.
I think this is good news compared to the last topics you had to deal with. The foundation was established by Jay and Diane Stein after the death of their son. JJ was a former Rehoboth lifeguard, and Jay, his father, was also a lifeguard back in the 1950s. And the foundation was established as a charitable organization. And what's happened is Diane feels that this is a time that she'd like to transition this, and I think she is interested in making sure that there's some stewardship and that maybe the city can play a role in doing this. Obvious benefits to the lifeguard, we'd probably be one of the few beach patrols that offered any kind of a scholarship for to lifeguards for their exceptional performance. The basic framework of what we're talking about is creating a perpetual fund. Basically, we'd be distributing the earnings. We have not created the documents forming this, and I've had discussions with Barbara Danberg of Byron Mandalis about what might be the optimal structure. Initially, I thought that maybe we just set up a fiduciary fund on our books, which governments do all the time for their pension plans and different beneficiary plans. But I think one of the objectives we wanted to achieve with this was the ability for donors to receive a tax deduction if they contributed to the foundation, and also for the distribution of scholarships to be a tax-free event. And so basically where we are right now, we are really leaning toward the creation of a 501c3 charitable organization. And it would accomplish those objectives as far as the donations and the tax objectives. You probably ask, well, why, if you're going to form a 501c3, why is this before the city commissioners? Well, I think the idea is this entity would probably be, it will be classified as what's called a component unit. And component units are typically organizations that are not really part of the city, but they have a relationship with the city financially or by board appointment. And it's Diane's preference that the lifeguard captain, who would know who the outstanding lifeguards were for that season, and Chief Banks, and this would be done by position, not by name, they would be appointed to the board by the city commissioners. And because the city commissioners would be appointing the board, that would really make it as a component unit. And you say, well, what does that have to do with our financial reporting? Well, I think it accomplishes a couple of objectives. One, it provides some stewardship in that this organization would be separately managed, but it would be disclosed in our auditor's report every year. And on our statement of activities and statement of net position, there would be a FAR column out there disclosing their financial activities. It would not be blended within the city's finances, but I think that this is a good idea. It's not an uncommon thing. Cities do it all the time. And so basically what we're asking is that we get the city's approval to support this, and we would probably proceed with Byron Mandalis's attorney to create the documents. There'd probably be some language in the documents regarding distribution of the money. We would want, since it's a perpetual fund, we probably just want to distribute the earnings every year. Currently, the assets of the foundation are maintained by Morgan Stanley, and Mrs. Stein's very pleased with the performance. I think they started with about $150,000, I think, and it's about $360 now, or it was last month. It might not be today. But I think that our plan would probably be to leave those assets with Morgan Stanley, let them manage it. I think maybe one consideration is somebody says, well, what are the risks to the city if we created something like this? And I think that they're pretty minimal. The investment advisor, of course, has responsibility on his end to maintain the objectives of the investments. And the only other involvement, really, the police chief and the board. Mrs. Stein is willing to join the board of this 501c3. And basically, their role would be to approve the applications for these scholarships and to determine how much could be distributed. And they probably have, I would think, one meeting a year to accomplish that. So what we're really looking to the city to decide, maybe at their next meeting, is whether you believe we can go ahead and proceed with this plan, and if so, we'll create this 501c3. And I think it'll be a good thing in the sense that all the eyes of the world are going to, if anybody looks at our audit report, I assume people do, but it will be disclosed. And I think the other benefit is they're not asking for any money from the city, they're giving money to the city. And so are there any questions?
I do. So this sounds good and very thoughtful. Is the administration of the scholarships themselves, it's not done by the city, it's done by others?
Well, there'd be a separate organization. Just the 501c3 is a separate entity apart from the city. We did consider the possibility of making a fiduciary fund as part of the city, and we ruled that out because of the tax benefits. But the 501c3 would basically manage the affairs of both the money and the distribution, but the city officials and the public will see, because we're going to report this activity in our auditor's report as a component unit. There's several types of component units, and one's called a blended component unit, where there's such a close relationship with that entity to the city government that they just blend all the financial activities in the city's reports. This is going to be discreetly presented. It's totally separate, and we want it separate because one thing we don't want to do is be mixing any of this money with the city's funds. So I think that pretty well sums it up. I mean, are there more questions?
I have a few. There's already a foundation. Why not just keep it as it already is and start a new 501c3?
Well, I don't know that they've created a 501c3, and I have to confess, I don't know what kind of organization or foundation. Now, of course, the foundation, I don't know whether if they have, I don't know what the formal documents are at this time that they have. And but we could certainly investigate that. If there's already a 501c3, I wouldn't probably create another one. I'd just go ahead and investigate. But I don't think there is one, and I'd have to get that information.
Okay. And how would the formation of this, your time, Glenn's time, how is that being funded? Would it come from the assets of the current assets of the foundation, or is this an expense to the city?
Well, every year they'd have to file a 990, the financial report with the, or the tax report with the IRS.
Right.
It's for a nonprofit, and that would be paid for out of the earnings that are accumulating inside the account at Morgan Stanley. So, as I said, we wouldn't be asking for any money from the city. Any funding would come from the foundation, and that would be an expense prior to the distribution of the scholarship monies. And the scholarship monies would, I may be getting ahead of myself, but I'm thinking that they'd probably be just written directly to the institution. There may be other considerations that we haven't really gotten into. Say somebody is not going to college, they're going to a trade school, all that type of thing. But I think that can be, I think I would be looking to Mrs. Stein for some direction on what her objectives might be. And but I think generally speaking, most of, I'd say the vast majority of the lifeguards are high school or college students.
And what would the city's role be in the formation of the board of directors and all of these nuances that would go in?
That's a good question. That's why it is a component unit, is because the city would be appointing the board of directors. And that's what creates this component unit relationship. So the only thing is that it is the desire of the founder, and I would hope that the city would honor that the people who would be on basically permanent members of the board of directors and would be the lifeguard captain and the chief of police, and probably have a third member. Mrs. Stein's willing to serve, but at the point that she leaves, she may have a recommendation who her replacement could be, but the city would have to approve that. So I might be getting a little ahead of myself, Commissioner, on that. We have to kind of discuss that, work out. But I mean, definitely the city's connection to this is board appointment.
City's connection, I'm sorry, is what more?
Board appointment. You're going to appoint the board.
And would we envision that this entity would have its own insurance for the officers and directors, or they would fall under the city's insurance?
That's a good question, because I thought about that earlier, whether they're, I think that I really need an opinion from our insurance agent, whether it could be covered under our plan. If the risk, I think, is more on Morgan Stanley than it is us, because the police chief and the board will have the checkbook, and there'll be oversight. We're going to see who they write the checks for. So I see minimal risk as far as defalcation or improper behavior. Yes.
Anybody else? Commissioner Legree?
This is a fiduciary fund, and it's a one-time amount.
Well, it's really not going to be a fiduciary fund. I mean, it's defining a fiduciary fund, meaning that it is a department of the city, and the city's fiduciary fund. Like a lot of city governments have a fiduciary fund for managing the pensions of their employees.
Yeah, that's the reason I asked that.
This is not. This is a separately incorporated unit of the company. It's really pretty much just like the library would be. And I would say that if we appointed, the city commissioners appointed the board of directors of the library, we'd have to report the library as a component unit.
And the board of directors will make decisions on where to invest the money, and how's that going to work?
I don't think that, I think who the investment advisor would be pretty much the extent of their role. And currently, it's Mrs. Stein's feeling, and I agree with her. I know the investment advisor. He's a tennis player, so I kind of know him. And he's done a good job. I mean, he's taken $150,000 to $360,000 since they established this. So no, we wouldn't be inclined to switch investment advisors probably right away, but that would be the up to the option of the board.
But this fund's perpetual, is that correct?
Well, it's designed to be perpetual. You know, I would say that the board may decide when the language is written that they distribute the earnings of the fund, but there may be an exceptional year where the market goes down, but I don't really see that because it's going to still, probably he's going to be investing in companies that have a pretty good dividend record.
Oh, I'm sure.
So I would say that I wouldn't want to box ourselves in a corner and say we couldn't distribute principal in a certain year. Maybe you've got a couple of really exceptional lifeguards and you want to give some extra money. You know, they may have, I can't envision everything that might happen, but I don't want to tie the hands. I wouldn't think the board would want to tie their hands. They'd want to, but I think generally speaking, it would be distribute the earnings every year.
I'd say press on.
I'm sorry?
I would say, do you press on? And I will vote accordingly. I take it.
I'll say I very much would prefer that the family had set up this organization, and they very much have the opportunity to appoint our chief of police and lifeguard. It gets a little murky when we're establishing the organization and appointing the board of directors. I mean, I certainly see.
Well, you're not, excuse me, Commissioner, you're not really establishing it. It's being established by the organization itself. The only thing we're hoping that is you will, well, and I might have to backtrack on that a little bit. You're going to appoint the board, so there is a role. But I mean, as far as the board's not going to be selected probably until the founder creates the 501c3.
To my knowledge, the Beach Patrol has a very active alumni association. Have they been approached to establish this 501c3, or is the Beach Alumni Association? I mean, they've become very active in the last year to 2 years. Has there been any consideration to that? I guess I just have pause about city employees having fiduciary responsibility over other people's monies. I just question that.
Well, I see it as an advantage because we've talked for years on these other 501c3s that come to us for their handout every year, and we don't know that much about we see their 990s. If you look at a 990, there's not a lot on there. Maybe they submit their documentation. I think the city's pressing them more and more, but this information is going to be part of our financial statement, so it's going to be open for the world. And as far as the lifeguards, I talked to one former lifeguard, about a week ago. They're delighted to hear about this. I mean, it's going to be something that they're going to be able to attract lifeguards and retain lifeguards in situations where if a lifeguard's salary might be slightly less than in another town, the opportunity for scholarship might say, well, gee, I like to work for Rehoboth. So I don't think, I haven't gotten any calls from any lifeguards that are opposed to this. And, but I think the word's spreading around among the alumni that we're doing this.
Let's pause a minute. Let me turn to Glenn, and Glenn, if you could give a legal perspective, if you would, on this, and then let's maybe conclude that conversation with what are the actions requested of the commissioners at this point.
Right, so again, Bert's working with Barbara Danberg from my firm. This is the kind of work that she does, so she's much more skilled in this than I am, and that's why they've talked through the different entities that could be created to actually manage the fund. It may be that there is a 501c3 and that we have not examined the documents yet. The first question was, if we take it on, what would it look like as a city? And so we moved away from fiduciary fund and went to 501c3. Part of the reason is whether the actual scholarship monies are taxable to the person getting them, whether they're, so all the tax considerations came into it, and she said, Barbara suggested that a 501c3 is probably the appropriate vehicle. But if you're gonna set up a fund and the city's gonna have some responsibility for it, you gotta establish a board, and that's why Bert says that the group of commissioners would be setting that board. I think you said Mrs. Stein requested that the beach captain and the chief of police be on the board, which seems to make sense, them being in that capacity. So I think the next step really is, this was intended to be sort of a, let you guys all know, let the Board of Commissioners know that this is something that you have been requested to take on. As Bert says, I really think once it's established, there won't be much for the Board of Commissioners to do other than you'll see it in the annual audit being reported. As far as directors and liabilities insurance, my hunch is that our policy could cover this board, and it probably wouldn't even be a cost increase for us. But we don't know, we haven't asked that question yet, so that's a question we'll have to look at. But this initial thing was, is this something that's attractive to you? Is there the benefit for the lifeguards of sufficient value that you want us to have, if you want the city to have some role in ensuring the fund is managed?
For me, it sounds like something to continue to explore.
We would, when the entity is established, we would set up bylaws that would be the guardrails to say how the monies can be distributed and those sorts of things, but none of that work's been done yet. This was just an initial, do the commissioners, are you satisfied with the city taking this on?
So Commissioner, if you want them to continue to explore, what are some, can you target or focus in on anything you'd like them to further investigate and bring back?
I think what I'd really be interested in is knowing, although I think Bert may have already answered it, is that any cost of staff here at the city or the legal issues would be funded by the foundation rather than the city? Like, I'm wondering, Bert, your time spent on this, is that under the city or is somehow getting reimbursed somewhere, if you catch what I'm trying to?
If they want to have a meeting in off hours, I'll meet with them. I don't have any interest in using city time if that's not provided. I mean, I can do it whenever they want to meet.
No, I'm really trying to ask, are there any administrative issues that you would want to oversee or you would have to do?
Well, I think most of the activity is probably going to be right in the Morgan Stanley monthly statement, because there's going to be a checking account associated with it. So I think the entire set of books is probably going to be in that Morgan Stanley statement, because they're going to write checks to pay for the tax preparation annually, and if there are any other expenses, I wouldn't think there'd be too many other expenses. And then the checks would be written to the institutions probably where they're attending, as opposed to giving the check to the lifeguard himself. I'd have to look into that, but I think that's probably the appropriate way. I think the city's role is valuable in this sense that we're going to have a higher degree of transparency than we do with these other organizations that we give $350,000 a year to. Not that I'm opposed to any of those organizations, but we're going to be able to have a lot more transparency and be able to scrutinize the activities. So there's not going to be a lot of time involved. We're going to write a few checks every year.
If I was a donor with this kind of money and I wanted to do what this person wants to do, rather than depend on a alumni association or some other outside group that may or may not be here, I would be happy to have the city administer it.
Well,
Print the board members.
I think that was the exact point, and that's good, because the reason why the city's involved is because the city's going to be here, and if you set up a separate organization managed by the alumni, the lifeguards, a lot more moving parts there, and a lot more things can change. Well, if it's under the umbrella of the city to some degree, I think you have, some guarantees of, not guarantees, but I think that proper stewardship is an advantage. I mean, too often, having been involved in audits over my accounting career, it's amazing how money can disappear all of a sudden. Fire companies, VFWs, we read about them in the paper every year. Well, we're going to be watching this money, and I think that's why Diane is supportive of this.
And just to add to that too, I mean, I think that was Diane's original intent, was to have the city manage this, and that's why she came to the city and specifically requested a meeting with us. I think she sort of had and Bert, correct me if I'm wrong, more of a hands-off approach, that she didn't want the foundation to manage it. She didn't want to put in the time and effort to have the foundation manage it. And she started off by coming to the city as opposed to the lifeguard alumni association or anything like that. So I think she's got faith in the city and ultimately the interest in having the city maintain it. So that's why we're starting off with how the city would maintain it.
So would this be a disillusionment of the foundation and an establishment of a 501c to manage the funds?
I don't know, Commissioner, what entity they have created. You know, they call it a foundation. A foundation would have a different tax
Yes.
with the entity type with the IRS. So if there is a foundation set up, then basically what we'd want to do is just they probably want to move the assets into the 501c3, and we would manage from there, and they could dissolve the foundation. If in fact they have already set up a 501c3, then we could explore the possibility of just taking that over and creating a board and changing the bylaws and
Just other questions, and Commissioner, or other solicitor, your associate could answer these, I'm sure, very quickly. But my experience with 501c3s and 501c6s in the past is that, you know, as you'd mentioned, there has to be establishment of bylaws. There has to, I've always had, you had to establish an investment policy. Depending on the size of the assets, you have to have whistleblower procedures, you have to have a record retention policy, these types of things. That all depends on the volume of the investment. So again, I don't know the size of it, don't need to know the size of it, but IRS does have thresholds that have to be met for those types of commitments with regards to policy, investment, all that type of stuff. So, you know, just some, you know, safeguards, or just answer those questions as we get into this, so. And you know, I don't know if they've also considered a charitable remainder trust. This may be an option that would work also.
I mean, if we get to a point where you want to know more of the details, I mean, I can certainly have Barbara join us for a meeting. But she, like I said, she does this stuff.
It's, you know, it's pretty rote stuff. I mean, they establish it all the time, but there's
Right.
just certain thresholds that that I'm aware of, that you have to meet when establishing this. And I guess, again, as I mentioned before, just having a city employee responsible for funds that are donated by others, I just...
I mean, ultimately, the board is going to be responsible for the funds. And
We are the board, though, right? I mean,
No. So the entity will have its own board. I mean, you'll appoint the initial board, but once the entity's up and running, it'll be that board that'll have the role and rules and
Did I hear a
responsibilities.
stipulation that it was the chief of police and the lifeguard, the captain of lifeguards were the...
They would have membership on that entity's board, is the way I understand. That's the request that's been made by Ms. Stein.
And would those be permanent positions?
Depends on how we draft the bylaws, but my understanding is that she's asked that they would be permanent positions.
Yeah, it's intended, the fund is supposed to be perpetual, and the board positions for the lifeguard and the captain would be permanent positions.
And that would all have to be defined in the bylaws? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I don't want to seem pessimistic, but I do have a little pause, and I'm very thankful for the Stein family, and this is a great opportunity for us and a good thing to attract lifeguards. And I think the city managing the money and having an eye on that and doing the audit, that's all fantastic, and I don't see liability on that. What gives me pause, though, and where I see liability is in the more administrative aspect of it and making the decisions on who gets the scholarships. And in the past, we've had certain situations within our lifeguard or beach patrol groups that have gotten a little dramatic. And when one person gets scholarships, but another one doesn't, and they're upset, and then the city is now engaged in a lawsuit over, you know, someone that didn't get a scholarship. That's where I have pause in this process.
Mr. Mandalis would have to comment on that kind of liability, but I have a feeling that if there is that situation where somebody is protesting, that their action would be against the 501c3, and I don't think the city, but maybe.
I mean, I agree that it would likely be the entity that's sued. You know, anybody can sue anybody they want. They can include the city as a named party, and we'd have to file some motion to get out of it for sure. So that certainly is a possibility. As far as awarding the scholarships, Bert and I have talked a little bit about this, that, you know, the bylaws are going to give us an opportunity to put guardrails again around how those monies would be awarded and what kind of flexibility the board would have in awarding them. So that would be our opportunity to ensure that there's a good framework about how the monies are distributed and who kind of qualifies for it.
And I'm not opposed to it, I just have paused. Ideally, I would like the family to establish it for the benefit of our lifeguards, and there be a little bit more separation from the city establishing and doing all of this, managing it. Ideally, that's how I would like to see it, but I understand that's not the intent of the family and what they want to do.
Well, it's the oversight benefit that the family appreciates. And as I've said, I mean, I could sit here for an hour or two and tell you about frauds that I'm aware of, and some that, you know, I was very close to. I mean, I can tell you about the city of Harrington about 20 years ago, what happened up there. But no internal controls. But the truth is, I think it provides a degree of security. If they just take this 501c3 and say we're distancing it, they don't have the benefit of our oversight.
Yeah, I understand that.
And I don't think the risk, if the market goes bad and the funds decline, I don't think that comes back to the city. I think that's the investment advisor. So everybody has their own concept of risk, but I think that there's a risk in everything we do here. And I personally think it's a good structure, and I support it.
Is there a plan in place now, or how these scholarships are awarded and all of that?
Well, I don't know whether it could be done by this year. A lot of that's going to be dependent upon city commissioners, but I mean, lifeguard captain, I mean, there's not that many weeks left in the season, so whether they would do this year, or whether they start distributing next year, or there's no real reason they couldn't meet in the fall. And you know, I don't know if there's a time limit, but I think the board would have to decide that. Again, this is going to be an independent body. I mean, our only role is appointing the board, and because it's preferred that two of the key employees of the city are on the board, that's why the city's involved as a component unit.
So what's the flavor here? Are we amenable to continuing to pursue this and bring it back at a future meeting? I would say Glenn and Bert, do you have enough information on what additional is desired by this body to bring to the next workshop meeting?
Well, I think Mrs. Stein is anxious to get moving on this. I know that. I mean, and it can be, I guess, as complicated as we want to make it. But I think that the sooner she can transition the money, I think that would be preferable.
I understand, but we've got the commissioners up here to satisfy before we invest too much more time in it, I guess. I am amenable to moving forward with it, but you hear some colleagues still have some hesitations and have some things that they want to answer. You know, if we felt comfortable, we could, I hate throwing everything into the next regular meeting. You know, if we felt comfortable, we could come forward with that and then have a vote on whether to proceed or not again, because that sounds like where we're at, you know, unless some of the commissioners are satisfied with some more information to receive in a future meeting. I'm not, we might need to vote on it
I
to go forward, but again, if we postpone it to then or to the next meeting is our August workshop, then the nearest vote after that would be at the August regular meeting, and that's democracy in action. I know Diane would like to accelerate things, but that's the speed at which we work.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you set the timetable, but I mean, I think the main concern, if I understand, is risk. What's the city's risk, and why is the city involved in this? And I think you commissioners will have to get past those to be comfortable with the risk and be comfortable with the concept here. And once that happens, I think we can proceed.
So is anybody up here willing to re-articulate the steps that they want to have Bert come back?
Well, let me, Mayor, if I can just add.
Clarify.
If I can just add to the discussion, so the next thing we would need to do is actually create the documents that would establish the entity, and that's going to take time. So even if Bert was authorized today, I don't know if we'd have the documents ready for the July regular meeting. So I think what we'd like to have coming out of this meeting is consensus that we can at least go forward with creating the documents so we can get that process moving, because that's probably the time factor in all of this, is getting the documents created. But if you're not ready to, if there's not consensus to move forward now, we can wait till the regular meeting this month and you can vote on it.
I'm just waiting on Glenn if Glenn gives us okay on the risk, I have no ability to make separate determinations of risk. If you think the risk is fine, I'm ready to vote and go forward.
I do. I mean, based on the discussion we had today, though, I will have a conversation with Barbara, a little more in-depth conversation about, what exactly is the city's role and responsibility once the fund is established, and what is our exposure. I agree with Bert that the exposure generally is going to be on the investment advisor and the board itself. But, to your point, the city gets named in lawsuits all the time for things we didn't do. So.
And Glenn, the documents that you're speaking of, will it spell out the answers to the questions that have been raised up here?
Yeah, I mean, it'll name the board of directors, how many people will be on the board of directors. It'll establish that the chief and the lifeguard captain are members. It will establish a policy for distribution of the assets. Once the board is created, though, there will be probably some work the board is going to need to do to further define their role. The investment policy will be a policy of the board. They'll have to meet and figure that out. But yeah, the basic documents establishing the entity will answer a lot of the questions that have been raised.
And will the time and cost involved in establishing those documents, who will bear those costs?
Yeah, based upon the discussion today, I think we need to go back to the fund and see if the fund, Ms. Stein, whether she's willing to pay for that out of the fund. We actually have not had that discussion yet because our conversations have been generally brief to this point, but there will be some dollars associated with creating the documents for sure.
Just clarification from my point of view is, has the foundation awarded any scholarships in the past?
Well, that's one of the issues they're going to have to deal with. I don't know about the lifeguard scholarships, but I do know that there was money distributed to some needy residents in West Rehoboth. So.
Some what residents? Needy. Oh, needy, okay.
Some people living in, and I don't know who the recipients were, but that's going to be one of the board's responsibilities, is determine what the parameters are. So. And I would look to Diane for some guidance on that, but I mean, she may just say, well, it's strictly for Rehoboth Beach lifeguards, and we're not going to support any other charitable.
So their focus is completely changing to now focus on the lifeguards.
Well, I think it was originally, I think what happened, I think Mrs. Stein's daughter felt that there was a need to distribute some money. So there was some money distributed to West Rehoboth residents. I don't know that would continue. I mean, I think the board probably would set the parameters and say that it's strictly for Rehoboth lifeguards, or they may want to broaden the parameters. It's up to them. I mean, I guess it really isn't the city's. I mean, it's going to be the board's opportunity
all
and
starting from scratch.
responsibility. And I think if you have two members on the board, the lifeguard captain and the chief of police, they're probably not going to want to distribute it for anything else except lifeguards.
Right, okay. But all this is new.
So the bylaws and what have you would establish the size of the board and the direction or the reason, I mean, all of that information so that, you know, if the board were certainly expanded to 5 and 3 of those people were from outside the city and we decided, well, we're going to disperse this money to Dewey Beach lifeguards or Dewey Beach Police Department or, you know, the need of West Rehoboth. I mean, those are the kind of things that are in the bylaws or the founding documents. So is that the type of thing that is going to be addressed?
So we're going to have this discussion and see where Ms. Stein ultimately would feel comfortable with the monies being distributed, but this is an opportunity for you as a Board of Commissioners to have us include within the bylaws that monies can only be limited to these certain recipients, and that'll be a question for Ms. Stein as to whether she's comfortable with those limitations being put in the bylaws. You know, so we put a clause that here's the limitation upon the recipients and can't be changed by the future board of the entity.
This is a development that I was unable to to foresee.
Yeah.
I think differently now if it's not lifeguard, if we're not dealing with lifeguards.
Our understanding
It's
is
a whole new
lifeguard is the
Lifeguard's
goal
the
here.
objective. I mean, there was an incident where, I mean, they controlled their foundation and they can decide who they wanted to give money to. So I'm just telling you what they did in the past. There was a distribution to West Rehoboth, but I think when we create this entity, I think we'll define pretty much who's eligible for the distributions.
Well, just to put it another way, for me, I would be looking for an exclusive relationship with the foundation if the city's going to be involved.
Well, we would have it, I would think, if we're appointing the board, it'd be exclusive. I'm not
Well, but
sure.
I'm saying until we see the documents, I don't know that any of that to be true. Am I missing something?
I think
Why are
what-
we talking about something when we don't have documents in front of us that would lay out exactly the way this is going to work?
Well, I think that the real limitation is you're appointing this board. And you're not going to tell them how to create their documents. It's their 501c3.
Then why is Glenn involved? Why is Baird? I'm now
Because-
confused.
Because we have 2 members of, we have the beach patrol captain who's an employee of the city, and we have chief of police on this board. That was recommended by Mrs. Stein. And I, from an internal control standpoint, I like the idea because we're going to be watching the money closer than any other 501c3 that we have a relationship to. And so our relationship's strictly appointing the board, and they're going to run it.
I think what the commissioners are saying is that they don't want to establish, they don't want a component of the city, even though it's a separate entity, they don't want a component entity of the city distributing funds to some cause that they're not supportive of. It should be funds that are distributed to the city or the lifeguards exclusively.
Well, it's pretty, you don't really have to hire an auditor to see where the money's going to go. You just get your you've got the checkbook from Morgan Stanley, and you've got your monthly statements, and it's about a pretty easy process, very transparent. So I don't know. It'll be, if the risk is too much, then they'll have to go to Plan B. But I personally don't see any significant risk.
I think what we're saying is that if we're going to move forward and we're going to help in the formation of the documents and the bylaws, we want the purpose of the organization to be solely focused on.
Yeah, see, I think that's where we disagree, Commissioner. You're not going to, you might be able to see their bylaws, but they're going to create them. It's not the city's role. The city's going to, it'd be like if we were if we appointed members of the library or the museum. It's the same, I think, same kind of logic. your role is pretty limited. The only reason that it becomes a component unit of the city is because Mrs. Stein has asked the city to help with some of the oversight, and the oversight is appointing the board. And I hear what you're saying. You say you want to have a role in looking at the documents. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but ultimately it's the board's decision on whether, and then I guess at some point, if it's not satisfactory, we go to a different plan.
I think we like the idea of the money. I think the issue is to put the chief of police and the head of the lifeguards in charge of something. If money is distributed to other entities, just makes no sense. There's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, but I mentioned, and I'm almost sorry I did, that the one instance they had where money was distributed to West Rehoboth, that was a one-off deal. These documents are going to be written where we're supporting only lifeguard scholarships.
But we don't know that till after you're saying we don't
Well,
have any.
That's what we want
I'm
to see.
relying on what Mrs. Stein's telling me.
Okay.
And she met with city manager and the chief of police and the lifeguard captain. And,
Well, somebody's got to weigh in here if you've been involved in discussions, because I'm not going to vote on something. If I'm hearing we'd have to take a vote on this, Mayor? Yes, we take a proper vote on this, and it's got to be something in writing, not just verbally.
Well, this is just an introductory discussion.
Yeah.
Obviously, so they've got to come back to us with more information. If you don't mind, let's go to Chief Banks, then I'd like to go to the public and come back to us.
Yeah, I think it's sort of getting a little bit confusion, but meeting with Mrs. Stein, even after our initial meeting and afterwards, is truly just a scholarship fund set up for the lifeguard. She doesn't want it to go out to any other entity, so to be spelled out that in the bylaws and the board. We sort of have that now. I sit on a board or with a scholarship fund for the police officer / fire department, and also we meet, and it takes a couple times a year or whatever, because right after that you're going to set up what the scholarship looks like. So you're going to set up, parameters on how you fill out an application and what's going to go through. So the board will sit there and do that, and that gets into exactly if it's an essay, do you have to have volunteer hours, what it's for, but that's an educational scholarship fund too, and we've had that I think 4 or 5 years now. They just run that through the fire department only because of the tax write-off or whatever, but I sit on that board too and give it out, and we all meet and disperse the funds, and goes off how much money is interest or whatever. But Ms. Stein would be there. So, for example, on this other scholarship, and it would be the same way, I imagine, is if there was, this past year we gave $10,000 out, and the interest was, they usually just go off the interest, but if it's getting close or whatever and they got more than, they got 2 candidates that are worthwhile, they might say, you know what, go ahead and put the extra two in out of the principal or whatever. We try to stay away from that, but that's all spelled out in the bylaws and how many. But this scholarship would be totally for the lifeguards and wouldn't reach out anywhere else. Like Mr. Duke said, the daughter of Ms. Stein just thought, hey, we had this money, we haven't set anything up that, let's give to the community. So that was just something they did even before they approached us. But what she really would like to do is just turn it over and sort of be done and know where it's going to go in good hands and go for the future of the lifeguards to help out. Again, her son and her late husband all were part of the lifeguards.
Thank you, Chief. If you don't mind, let's pause a minute and go to the public. Is there anybody who would like to say anything on this topic? Come to the front microphone here. State your name and relationship to the city, please.
Good morning. My name is Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. I really have no objections to the discussion and the idea thrown forward. I've known the Steins all my life, and they've lived around here. They were here before we were here. I'd like to thank Bert for an ample discussion. I'm not concerned about how much money is in the fund currently, but I heard $100,000, so that gave me a little bit more faith.
360.
I was concerned about Sposato, the discussion about what it's going to take to maintain the island, the new park down there. And I thought that was a good question because too often these things get put in and we never hear what it's going to cost to maintain them. I have a little bit of a problem with the chief and the lifeguard captain, not names, the positions, because I think in this case, the lifeguard captain here is appointed by the chief of police, unless I'm wrong. But final thoughts are, I'm a member of Sussex County Electrical Contractors Association. Within the past 2 years, we went out and got a 501c3, which is not cheap anymore. It used to be basically free, and now the IRS charges substantially to process that paperwork. It requires auditing and reporting, and there are costs that go on, and I think you're asked a lot of wonderful questions. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Walter. Anybody else from the public? If not, we'll return it to the commissioners. Any further questions or direction? I think what process we're adhered to is if we're amenable, then we'll invite you back to the August workshop meeting. I think that's the quickest I want to handle this. That would allow us to vote formally if we so choose and we're ready at the August regular meeting. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything further?
Well, I'm not rehashing this here a little bit, but I thought that, as Commissioner Sharp said, to review the documents is what we would be voting on, other than the concept. And I thought the solicitor stated that it would take a while to prepare those documents, that would we have them by that time to review, or in advance that we don't get them the day of? My misunderstanding?
No, but that's my expectation is that, and I would direct Glenn and Bert and city manager, that we would like to see as much in writing as possible. I think it's nice to put a document in front of us.
In advance of the meeting, not at the meeting.
In advance of the meeting. That's why we need to postpone till the August regular meeting. I'm sorry, August workshop meeting.
I'm not sure whether Glenn's firm could sort of provide us with just a framework, an outline of what we're going to do, rather than, because right now we haven't formed anything, so who's going to pay his bill? Well, I think it might be better to, or maybe a good consideration to sort of present a framework. I thought I was doing that today, but I didn't get into enough detail. But I think if we outline, I speak with Mrs. Stein about what her preferences were and sort of give you a framework, and then I think we could proceed with preparing documents. But I don't think we want to prepare documents if this thing isn't going to be acceptable to the commissioners. And maybe that relationship, I mean, I think what Mrs. Stein was interested in is stewardship, and she thought the city is the best place to be the steward of this money. And I think that if the city's not interested, then we'll have to look to another entity, organization that would want to play that kind of a role.
I mean, I don't get the feeling that we are disinterested in doing this by any means. I don't think it's a clear path of how to manage this and go forward. And that's, you know.
See, the management is minimal, because your management, you're going to appoint a board and the foundation. And I mean, you don't manage the library. You're not going to manage this organization. You're not going to, it's going to be independent. And we're only asking you to provide a little bit of a stewardship role by allowing officials from the city to serve on the board. So I guess we can create, Glenn, I guess we could create a little bit of a framework to give the commissioners a higher level of comfort with what we're doing. Is that?
I think probably I think we will need to have a conversation with Barbara and see what she's able to provide. I mean, she may say, here's a perfect package, this is what they need to see. And so again, she's really good at this stuff. So I think a conversation with her will help us determine what we can bring back somewhat efficiently to the workshop meeting. And and she may say, you know, I can do the documents by then, and it's not going to be a great cost. But I do think that based upon the conversation, we'll probably need to ask Ms. Stein to, probably need my firm to establish a relationship with the foundation, whatever that is, and be paid out of the foundation for that document prep work.
And would the funds be under control of the city or the 501c3? Or where do the funds, they would be with the investment banker, I understand that, but under whose account, if you will? Is that still the foundation or the 501c3 or?
Ultimately be the 501c3.
Okay.
I have a question. Bert, did you come here today with an expectation you'd get a verbal approval to just proceed?
Well, I didn't know what was going to happen. I couldn't predict, but I mean, I thought that it was a pretty clear plan with minimal risk, and I thought, well, maybe the commissioners would feel comfortable with it, but.
Well, and I'm going to direct this to the Assistant City Manager. And with all the experience with the city solicitor and your firm that's up here, I am confused as to why it wasn't more fleshed out for when things come to the commissioners, because this is a catch-22 here, that we don't have anything to react to. It's all verbal.
Well,
So, and I really don't want to debate it and waste more time, but because I'd like to see this move forward, but it's the process of how it's moving forward that I find extraordinarily frustrating.
Well, if we came here and the commissioner said, and we gave a basic overview, which was the intent of this meeting, and the commissioner said, we want nothing to do with it, then you would have avoided spending probably $7,000 on document preparation and everything else. If I came here with a $7,000 document package and you said, we've heard nothing about this, who authorized $7,000 in document prep?
Got it.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, one suggestion you might want to consider, if we had a 3-member board and 2 of those members are city officials, that creates an obvious majority. If we just wanted to restructure and say we'd have the lifeguard captain on there and the 501c3 had other directors that they elected, then I don't think we'd have a component unit and we wouldn't have to talk about this anymore. But it doesn't fulfill the stewardship role that we sort of were looking for.
But we're being asked to decide on it before those decisions are made, on how many board members and all, right?
No, I think that all you're being asked today is, should we proceed and be able to come back with more information based upon the discussion that you had today?
Yes.
Okay. So, but ultimately, right, I mean, I think you're gonna have a good sense of what the bylaws look like and all of that before you actually appoint the board. And you may choose at that time not to appoint the board and say you don't want anything to do with it at this stage, having flushed all that out. You still have you will still have the opportunity to say no. Yeah.
I think it's a great cause. I think we just need to go forward and shape it the way we want it shaped and eliminate the parts that we can't deal with and minimize our risk. And I think you can tell us how to do that. So I'm ready to go to step 2.
And just to be clear, this will be paid out of the foundation, not the city.
They haven't had that discussion. It's what you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not requesting any money from the city.
No, but Glenn has to prepare all these documents.
Oh, well, I would assume that if we, well, I'm sure Mrs. Stein's going to say, suppose we go ahead and prepare all the documents, and then the city says, sorry, we're not interested. And, you know, I mean, I would be disappointed and out $700 or $1,000 or whatever, you know, it's going to be, and might just, you know, have to look at alternatives. But I understand it's a sort of a chicken-egg question.
Yeah.
We don't want to invest in documents, but
Yeah, I certainly think.
I think we want a clarification that this was for lifeguard scholarships.
Right.
That was, because that kind of came up 3/4 of the way in. And if we had some sort of written approval that that's what this is for, then I think we're all for it. But all of a sudden, it sounds like, well, maybe we can't, maybe it's not just for that.
Well, no, I think
I
I
think
gave
based
the
on what
wrong.
the chief said, that the conversation he's had with Mrs.
I know,
Stein
but
is-
we want to,
Yeah.
before you go forward and doing any documents, we just want to make sure this is for lifeguard scholarships and that's what it's for.
Right.
It's not to all of a sudden willy-nilly start,
Well,
handing money out.
Maybe one of the places to start is we'll get a letter prepared by Mrs. Stein, approaching the city, saying, here's what we want to do, give you an outline. We only want it for lifeguard scholarships. And, if the city's interested in considering it, proceed, we'll go to the next step. But maybe, I don't know, maybe if you provided us with a list of some of these questions, and I'll submit them to Mrs. Stein, she could answer them in her letter, and we could go forward. I don't know.
I guess one thing we could create that might give everybody a better comfort level is we could speak with her, and I'm not sure exactly how the foundation is managed, but we could probably develop a memorandum of understanding that we bring here that's basically a memorandum that says if we go forward, it'll be for lifeguards, it'll be, this many people will be on the board. I mean, it could lay out a basic memorandum of understanding.
And how about a definition of stewardship?
So that could be a next step.
All right, so we'll say that's our next step. We're targeting the August workshop meeting to bring this back in front of us. Is that all right? Thank you very much. With that, thank you, Bert. Thank you, Chief. With that, we're going to go to the next item of new business, which is to discuss recommendation of Street and Transportation Committee to ban all left turns off Rehoboth Avenue at cross streets on a year-round basis. Embedded in the agenda is a formal report issued by the Street and Transportation Committee. We have the chair of the Street and Transportation Committee here. That's Commissioner Ed Chernowski. I would like to announce at this late time, I would target around 12:30 to ish to end this meeting. I would like to get to this topic of no left turns. I would like to prefer to introduce the topic of the sidewalk at the corner of Grove Street and Columbia. Introduce, meaning we may just go over it and not have time to certainly go through the whole thing or settle it, because we do have time constraints. With that, Ed, being mindful that we do have your committee report embedded in the agenda, so we've all read that. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So the Streets and Transportation Committee, I think, has over the years discussed no left turns and the how long throughout the year those that restriction prohibiting left turns off Rehoboth Avenue onto the side streets is in place. And at one of our meetings earlier this year, after a discussion about how Rehoboth Beach has become busier year-round, and a few other facts that the median in between the traffic lanes on Rehoboth Avenue is such that only one vehicle can actually make a left, and then is waiting for that next traffic light to turn before it can go straight or make a U-turn, is such that really only one car can make a left. And then when the second car is waiting there to make a left, it's actually just blocking that left lane of traffic. So for that reason, and some discussion about pedestrian safety, it is recommended that we establish no left turns year-round, and not just during the summer season. So that is the recommendation before you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for your committee for coming up with this. I'm sure we all have some opinions on this. We've all gone up and done our U-turns. And Chief Banks is here. I would like to give you the opportunity to give your perspective on this. One question I would start off with is there's mention of the identification of evaluation criteria, and it mentions many near misses. Are there any warrants? Have there actually been traffic accidents caused because of left turns?
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I was at the Street and Transportation Committee meeting and from that meeting, I did go back and sit there and see if there was any accidents or whatever, because I will say there's near misses at times, but what was the cause of that? There have been a few at First Street and Second Street accidents, but when going back, the cause was not factored in because of left-hand turns. There was other factors that caused the accident. So I cannot come up with any accident-related incidents because of the left-hand turns. One was under intent of driving, basically not paying attention. A car was stopped in the median, whatever, and no one's right behind it, so I guess you could sort of contribute or whatever and thought the light turned green, and they just sat there. Another one was in a hurry and kind of rear-ended it, just a little teeny bump. Actually, there was no damage, but a police officer was responded. So basically, left-hand turns did not cause an accident, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. Any other perspectives or?
I will say again, after the meeting, I just take it upon myself. I think most people know I like to get out and walk and talk to people. And so I kind of did a polling, not that it's scientific by no means, to businesses, residents, and people alike. And it's probably about 100 individuals. And I didn't find one that said they wanted to get rid of it. They like the thing during, it goes from May 1st to September 30th. So they understand it during the summer months, but during the winter months, they realize traffic does back up. That is the case, especially with delivery vehicles. But they said they thought that was okay because that's usually just on the peak times during the weekends. And then, they had the rest of the fall and winter to make those left-hand turns and makes it more convenient. I know in one of the, and I always say polled the police officers, and they said the same thing. I know resident Michael Strange did write a letter and all that. And I was kind of going over that letter with the officers, and they kind of agreed with him. It's just that they feel like it would back some traffic up too, or have some how do they say, negative consequences if implemented and all that. So that's just their opinion, no scientific engineering study behind it, just with no accidents or anything like that. But yes, I think anybody can see that we're year-round. Traffic does back up. So again, I could play it either way, but as a police officer in public safety, I have to look at crash data. There isn't any to support that, and then I go and talk to the residents and businesses. I mean, ultimately, it's your guys' decision, but just a few, like I said, 100 people that I spoke with, that was their flavor of it. But there's no crash data to say why we should change it that way.
Thank you, Chief. I noticed in the report it mentions name of Kevin Williams, and Chief were in attendance at the meeting. However, I assume that doesn't mean you endorse these proposals. It's just that you were there. Michael Strange had a letter he submitted for our last meeting dated June 4th. That was embedded in the last agenda. As I mentioned at the start of this meeting, he also submitted a letter dated July 1 that was submitted too late to be embedded in the agenda. It will be embedded after the fact. Some of his points are that drivers will continue to make illegal left turns even with permanent signage installed. It occurs currently. Traffic flow will still be delayed when an illegal left turn is executed, which happens currently with surprising frequency. Pedestrians will still make illegal crossings, not pay attention to crosswalk signals. I'm condensing this on any given day except for major holidays up until about 9:30 a.m. There's essentially free flow of traffic, and the ability to have left turn capability greatly enhances the speed. The decrease in near misses will not statistically improve by the decision to make no left turns year-round on Rehoboth Avenue, and from October to late April, the ability to execute a left turn is beneficial to local residents and et cetera. Again, we'll embed that in the agenda. I agree with some of what, or probably most of what Mike says. As a year-round resident here, there's kind of an enjoyment that we have. I feel that we have for not having having the ability to make right turn on red throughout some of the year, and being able to make those left turns, especially early in the morning. You run and get your newspaper or whatever, and you're not impeded by having to go up the street. Interesting, these are, the reference here is to cross streets. So our cross streets are First Street, Second Street, State Street on one side, and what is that, Fifth on the other, and Fifth, and then, of course, the roundabout. And interestingly, beyond some of those streets, there are U-turns built into the Rehoboth Avenue median. And the same thing happens there. You know, you get one person trying to make a U-turn there and they back up traffic. So if it applies to one, why wouldn't it apply to another? It's still, so I'm a little hesitant to support it. I understand the desire passed forward by the Street and Transportation Committee, but again, I have a hesitancy on that. Already 5 months from May 1 to September 30th, 5 months, the restrictions in place. In the rest of the year, a little less density of traffic. I find it acceptable to make those left-hand turns. Is there any other comments from the commissioners?
My only
Commissioner
comment
Bennett?
would be is, taking it all into consideration, I do think we're a lot busier in April now than we used to be. So I would be for extending the time of the no left versus a total ban. That's just my point.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I can just say I have heard no compelling reason to make this change by statistical evidence. And I would be much more interested in, I know the Streets and Transportation Committee does a lot of hard work. I would much prefer to see a more comprehensive plan about Rehoboth Avenue, because I don't think the left turns are the only issue on Rehoboth Avenue that we've struggled with for a long time and really not been able to make much progress. But this particular piecemeal, I would not, I think time could be spent differently with maybe better results.
All right, thank you. Any further commissioners before I
I'd just
go
like
to the
to
public?
mention, to your point, Commissioner Sharp, that was one of the recommendations from Mike Strange's first letter is it's one piece to what should be a comprehensive plan.
And it's hard. This is a hard nut to crack.
Yeah.
Was there following along with that conversation, though, was there a comprehensive list of, other than no left turns, that was developed by the Streets and Transportation Committee to look at Rehoboth Avenue?
Most of the previous discussions has been related to pedestrian safety and what mechanisms we have to ensure that on Rehoboth Avenue. We discussed, those new blinking lights at the crosswalks quite a bit and other things, but nothing rose to the level of warranting to make a recommendation to this body.
Thank you.
I think bicycles too, though, weren't there? Wasn't that a discussion as well as how do we manage the bicycle traffic there as well?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. If that's all right, we'll go to the members of the public. Would anybody like to say anything? Walter? Identify, your name and identify yourself again, please.
Thank you. Walter Brittingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. I appreciate the thinking. I appreciate the chief's analysis. Not a lot of accidents to support the facts are what they are. But remember, if you make a block on the left turn, that shoves everybody up. For instance, if you couldn't make, going eastbound on Rehoboth Avenue, you couldn't make a left to go to First Street. Then that forces everybody up into the circle, or at least up to Grottoes to make the U-turn, come back. And I know the Cisco truck is not there all the time, and Nicola will not be there all the time. But when the Nicola truck is parked there, then you're down to one lane of traffic, and in some cases, they even block the crosswalk. And I would sooner see you give more money so the chief, if he could, get better retention so that when you train somebody this year and they come back the next year and the next couple years like they used to, we used to have a lot of summer officers would get out and direct traffic and stuff like that, that would move traffic. The mayor's analysis of the U-turns, the second car does sometimes block the traffic, so you have the same situation, and I would encourage you to not mess with it. It works pretty good right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Anybody else? Dave, identify yourself in relationship to the city and identify yourself whether you might be on a committee or not that relates
Dave
to.
Diefendorfer, I am a member of a committee. I'm speaking as a private citizen here. So I understand the issue with the no left turns, and I had a feeling that they would not go forth. But I would ask you to think about Sea-Witch is an incredibly busy time. Thanksgiving is an incredibly busy time. Just like Commissioner Bennett said, if you could expand that to at least Sea-Witch, there's just thousands of people in town, and then Thanksgiving, where all the shopping is, I think that would be a benefit. You're still turning left in the winter months, but if you could expand it, I think you would have done something. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
If we could snap our fingers and not have any delivery trucks on the street, would that make any difference to anybody? Something to think about.
Anybody else?
Well, just to follow on with what was just said and what Commissioner Bennett said, bringing up April being very busy. I personally think October is one of the busiest months here in Rehoboth. We've got a lot of jazz festivals, the Sea-Witch, it's very congested. So I would be amenable to including at least October if we were going to expand the season for this at all.
So
I would be supportive of that as well if we expanded it as a compromised April, October, or just October.
So you'd say April 1 to just October 31?
Yeah.
That would take care of Sea-Witch.
And Easter and spring, yeah.
I'm amenable to leaving it alone, frankly.
Commissioner Shanowski, was it unanimous in the committee?
It was.
It was, okay.
So it was the idea that we would take this to a vote at the next meeting?
I wanted to gauge the interest here. If there was not a consensus to move forward, then it would sunset right at this meeting. If there is a consensus to consider it by majority, then we certainly put it on the July regular meeting for a vote.
I think Commissioner Sharp's idea that we need to get a comprehensive go at this is probably the best one. So I would be not in favor of taking it forward.
I'm not in favor of taking it forward, as you know.
So I'm not hearing a majority that want to take it forward.
Well, I would take it forward.
I'm not hearing a majority.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you guys said something yet?
Well, I mean, I would be okay with the change of dates if we want to do something, but I don't know if there's a majority to want to do something.
Speak into the microphone.
I would, I don't mind the change of dates if we were inclined to do something, but it sounds like there's a majority not inclined to do something, so.
I'm more inclined, like I said, I'm more inclined to leave it alone, but if the majority want to address it, there's two ways to address it. One is to consider the recommendation by going year-round with no left turn ban. The other option is to just expand the existing season, whether it is from May 1 to April 1 and/or from September 30th to October 31st.
If there's, as the chief reported, there's real no data that supports this, other than anecdotal from visual reports or what have you. But there's, fortunately, we've had no fatalities or or medical injuries that we're aware of. So again, I would think a more comprehensive approach to Rehoboth Avenue in general would be more productive.
So can you work on that? Give us an outline perhaps of what you might do to do a more comprehensive review and maybe work with a city manager or something on developing an outline to, sounds good. Thank you very much. Thank your committee for it. With that, we'll go to the next item. Like I said, we're time limited. I would at least like to introduce this topic today. This last item of new business is to discuss recommendation of Street and Transportation Committee to remediate parking and traffic concerns on Columbia Avenue at Grove Street by installing curbing and a sidewalk on a portion of Columbia Avenue, including discussing of funding. Commissioner Legree is the chair of the Street and Transportation Committee. Again, we have correspondence that we got from Jeffrey Good, who is here as a member of the public today. Jeffrey, we have and want to acknowledge your letter from last time, your letter from this time, and that you spoke in front of us before. So when we get to the public comment section, we'll certainly ask you to get up there. Hopefully you would just give us any new comment, because again, we all are very attentive to your position there on that. So again, because we're time limited, what I would like to do is, Ed, if you would have a very brief introduction, considering again that we have embedded in the agenda your formal street and transportation report on this, and then be able to discuss some points of it. We will likely not come to a conclusion in this short time, but introduce it and have to bring it back to August regular meeting. I'm going to bring up here, I don't know if there's any points you want to report, Commissioner Chernowski, but I'm just going to bring up.
Yeah, that would be fine. So we were initially approached by the homeowner there. One of the issues that they experience is illegal parking on their property. I'm sure you all know, right across the street is Royal Farms and that parking lot there. And a lot of people stop, run in, run out, park illegally, double park sometimes. So the homeowners asked us to look at the situation there. Long before I was on Streets and Transportation, the committee talked about it, asked the Public Works Director to reach out to DelDOT and get some thoughts from DelDOT and potentially come up with a solution on putting a curb which would prohibit parking, as well as, at that point, it was just a curb, I believe, is what was asked for. When the contractor came back with a sketch on a proposal, it includes a sidewalk and as well as the curbing, I believe required by ADA, which is why that was put in like that. So after further discussion at our last meeting, the committee recommends that the proposal that is before you, that we go ahead and do what they're suggesting we do with the sidewalk and curbing. Some of the other problems that was identified there on that corner, not just illegal parking, but also some of the first pictures there, you can see that there's debris and some soil and dirt that runs off of that property into the stormwater drain, as well as it just being a very heavily trafficked corner, both with pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. So that having that curbing there and a sidewalk for people to stand waiting to cross the street, et cetera, would be better for pedestrian safety as well. So that is the recommendation. The cost, the potential cost for it is somewhere between $25,000 and $29,000. And what was this?
There's an update in there.
There's an updated one, let me find it.
Okay, there may be an updated number on that. And part of the discussion for the committee was who bears the cost of that in the city code. When there is improvements, it usually falls on the homeowner. And I believe there was some discussion within the committee that perhaps it should be a shared cost between the city and the homeowner. The committee ended up not having an opinion on that and leaving how it to be paid for up to the mayor and commissioners.
Thank you, Ed. Open it to the commissioners before we go to the public. Yeah, this is a significant problem, I believe. I drive by there almost daily or multiple times daily. And if you can orient yourself by looking at the screen, you can see that where it says Grove Street, that means where the cursor is wiggling is the park area. And if you can imagine on Farmers Day, it's a maximum density of people and crowds trying to cross the street here and park down Columbia, et cetera. Also, if you look at, it's not drawn in here, but right about where the cursor is the right-hand curbing that then curves around, trying to prevent cars coming from the Royal Farm and making this left turn here. There's no left turns, there's a barrier there, and yet they still make that left turn there. It's very problematic. Just this last week, I observed coming up the street, cars parked all in this entirety of the area, including being skewed with the rear ends out into the Columbia Avenue by 2 or 3 feet. So it's a very problematic area there. I'm not sure what happens with all the trees there. There's a significant number of trees. Does anybody know if they're all going to succumb to this project?
I would maybe ask Kevin Williams to weigh in on some of the technical aspects, but I believe it was considered only one tree may need to be removed.
I think that's accurate, Commissioner. I think there's one that's will probably have to come out, and then the other 2 or 3 smaller ones I think would probably survive.
All righty, thank you.
And the only other item was the loss of 2 parking spaces. So it's really the one tree for sure, and then 2 parking spaces was the impact.
Parking spaces are down on this end here.
Correct.
Right here and here.
And Mayor, the cost estimate that's provided in the agenda is the most recent.
$29,000.
38,000.
38,000, okay. And that discrepancy there, the first time we published this, I think we published the cost at $29,000, $38,000. The engineer found that he had omitted something, I guess, so that's important in there. Frankly, you know, if this were down the street 1, 2, or 3 blocks, I would say the onus is on the property owner to put it in 100%. The location is where it is, across from Farmers Park. I'm leaning toward it more being a city project, although I would entertain comments on future maintenance of it. I don't know whether when the city installs things, who takes over the maintenance of it, but current code says the property owner has to maintain it. I also don't know whether we would want to entertain sidewalks along Grove Street or not. I don't think there are any now, so that would set a precedent if we wanted to do that. And 2 other notes, I would like to see this end reconfigured, which is neither here nor there right now. And I'd also like to see consideration of a possible crosswalk right here. Again, if you remember, we don't have a picture of it, but the curbing on the Royal Farm side of Columbia Avenue has a handicap depression there now. which goes nowhere. And it would go across the street right about where this arrow is there. So there's a possibility of doing something there. So again, I think that would remedy some of the problems and need serious consideration.
Kevin, could you elaborate why the sidewalk was added? I don't think it was.
DelDOT asked us to add that, so whether that was a, you know, if it's a, not really sure exactly.
The sidewalk to nowhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a sidewalk to nowhere, it's hard for me to believe that they would require it.
Well, if you look at it from coming west or south, I guess, on Columbia Avenue, it gives you an escape for people that are walking down Columbia, gets them over to the sidewalk into a safe landing to then cross at that next crosswalk.
Well-
Doesn't really do you any good heading.
Right,
Sidewalks
not at all.
either way.
Yeah, that's why,
Correct, so you're walking down the street, that gets them off the street and onto the sidewalk to get to the landing
It
where they would cross.
It does set the I guess the location on where you should be walking as you're going east on Columbia Avenue.
yeah, I have some sort of fundamental questions about the design. Are you ready for our
Yeah,
comments yet? First of all, I want to thank the Goods for coming forward with this because it's obviously been a problem for a long time. They've been very patient here for a year plus and while we're working through. And it's not only a safety problem, but I appreciate that the environmental problems that it causes as well. However, I think we're missing an opportunity here, and I'll tell you right now. And I'm glad to know also that you all initially just proposed the curb, because I cannot support any plan that does not include a green component, ever, ever. And there's 5 feet here that could be turned into a very nice bioretention area that would be both an environmental improvement as well as not allowing parking. Right now, all they have to do is ignore a sign, but you put a green space in there, some sort of a rain garden bioretention plant or whatever, along with the curbing, behind the curbing. And that's why I asked, was hoping that DelDOT did not require us to use a sidewalk, because I think a sidewalk would not be a good solution there for any number of reasons. But I'll tell you that if there is any kind of hardscaping there or any kind of sidewalk would be required, even to match up that crosswalk, it should be pervious.
Well, Susan, let me just respond. Let me reiterate my desire. If you remember, the Royal Farm side of the curbing comes up here and then it turns around and comes back. So right about in here, I would think we would consider a crosswalk, because there are a good number of people that come down here and want to cross the street and start walking down Sussex Street after the farmer's market. So my interest in the sidewalk would be to at least to that point to get you across the street. And this is open for interpretation, whether it's a bioswale or sidewalk or whatever, that could be feasible. Again, we need to go back to DelDOT, I guess, for their thing. Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Those are my thoughts about it.
Thank you.
Mayor, I would disagree with the crosswalk where you had mentioned it there. I think this is one of the most dangerous places in town, quite frankly. I drive it every day. And people come out of the circle, and then you really can't see around that curve because they have a huge plant or some sort of grass growing. And then people are already crossing. There is a crosswalk earlier up in the circle, but to put it there when people are already trying to maneuver the blind spots, I think just adding more pedestrian traffic there would not be helpful. And is it a state road, Columbia?
Columbia is a state
So
road.
they don't have any jurisdiction to pay for this, or?
No, well, they would, if they justified the project, they would say pay for it.
But because
Not on their priority list, so they're saying, hey, if you want to do it, you can do pretty much whatever you'd like, but you're going to have to pay for it.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Bennett, I hear your thing. I stood there for a while watching people, and as many people cross here as they do walk down, because it's, what is it? It's an extra 100 feet to walk down to the circle. And that's all those crosswalks at the circle roundabout, I think, are very dangerous. I think the only way it would work here is if you had the piano key crosswalks, and then you had those yellow flashing signs or something. So, so
I was just
par-
fearful of the
partially agree
traffic
with
backing
you.
up in the
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah.
Because as we've gotten more congested,
Yeah.
I've even had to wait and sit in the circle to get over to that side of town now, which
Right.
I've not had to do before.
Right.
I agree with.
Anybody
Go
up
ahead,
here
Mayor.
before we go to the public?
Yeah, I have something to
Yeah,
say.
let Commissioner Legree first.
This is the back sidewalk corner of the dairy market.
That's correct.
Corner of the sidewalk. We used to own that property for so many years. I've been here for 65 years. Then that's where Paul put the abutment out here and where this dangerous car parks. When they back up, they back out into Columbia Avenue. But that's the corner, the outside corner of the sidewalk, and this intersects with Sussex Street in a straight line.
Thank you. Our Commissioner Legree.
Yes. I think this is a really critical area and something that we should start working on. I guess we're going to be able to work with DelDOT, but this should be first and foremost, a stormwater management project, and we should be using all pervious hard surface, be it curb, be it sidewalk, whatever we decide, and make this a true stormwater management project and fund it by the city. Thank you.
I think utilizing this area for impervious concrete would be maybe a wise decision, especially so that we can see what impervious sidewalks mean. Because I've seen them, and to me, they're not the panacea. They fill up with sand, they clog, they need to be vacuumed out. And so, again, it's not a panacea. Down in Ocean View, they have them. And if you've ever come across a section where a concrete contractor has to do work, dig up the impervious sidewalk and replace it with new impervious sidewalk, it's ugly. It's ugly, and it does not match. So it might be a good test section for us.
This would be a great test case, and I think we could work it.
The way to get around that is not to have any hardscaping at all and to put it all as a bio.
And then there's that.
If I can offer another alternative. Yeah, Mr. Play here a minute. See if just about the same thing with regards to hard surface. And, oh, there she is.
Well, I'm controlling the screen. Do you want something?
I want something, yeah, up on.
Oh, you have something? Okay.
I have something to show, yeah.
Okay.
Will somebody make it happen? This is just an example of, again, with the sidewalk to nowhere, makes no sense to me with regards even it's a block or so long. The curbing, I certainly support, and I think that is something to look at. Here's just some examples of bioretention pond or rain gardens or what have you. If you can envision this, the curb there on the left-hand side with the swale that comes into a rain garden or bioretention area. This is a project that's in Washington, D.C., but gives you the idea of what could take place. Again, here's brick pavers that are pervious. They're not an asphalt type of pervious surface, but they're brick pavers that could be considered. But again, I do not support a sidewalk there. I think this should be strictly a rain garden area. If you can see in the upper left, there's, again, the swale that feeds the rainwater into the rain garden. Again, the look of it, if you build the street on the left-hand side, there would be the curb along Columbia Avenue with, again, the rain garden there to the left. Just some other perspective of that same rain garden. But again, this is the type of thing that I think we should be supporting. Also, just heard today that we'd have to take down one large tree. That's not what we are. We're a tree city. I think this would allow us to maintain that tree. And Commissioner Bennett stated about bringing more pedestrian traffic to that area with a crosswalk. And it's dangerous right now, and to bring more pedestrian traffic to that area, I think that's not what we would intend to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Stay there, if you would. And put the air media back on, please. Patrick, if you would show us on that diagram what is the extent of the sidewalk? In other words, would there be no sidewalk in your plan?
I would support no
Or would there be
sidewalk.
would there
You
be at
could,
least
you could put
here?
a landing pad, the pie-shaped landing pad there at the corner.
Right here?
That would support a landing pad for someone. But again, the curbing all the way down to the property line at the second house there, the extent of what we see there, the survey, and then that, where you see the existing sidewalk portrayed now, that area would become the rain garden.
I love that idea of the rain garden. However, I'm also envisioning the people, especially on Farmers Market Day, that park down Sussex, that park down Columbia, that walk all the way and cross to that side, and then they're going to have to be walking between the curb and the road.
Well, it would be yellow curbing, so no parking there that entire time, and you could hatch mark it if you wanted to. But again, we're trying to solve a problem with farmers market that is 1 day a week, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months out of the year. And again, it is heavy pedestrian traffic, but it is a safety problem, and that's, to me, bringing more pedestrian traffic to that area, encouraging it. This discourages it, moves it to the other side of the street. There are no sidewalks in any of that area on Sussex, on Kent, on Columbia, on Henlopen, on Grove. There are no sidewalks in that area whatsoever.
Again, where would pedestrians in the scenario I have be walking?
Where they walk now, in the street.
Could you almost do a bike lane so that it's just a pedestrian walkway?
You could
Right off the
possibly do
curb.
that at bike lane, but I don't know what the width of the street must maintain.
I think what
Because
you-
you've got delivery trucks coming in there, you've got cars, again, making a U-turn out of the Royal Farms, making a U-turn coming back to the circle.
Yeah, I think you have to be aware of creating any pedestrian or bicycle lane that would promote people parking there illegal.
But again, a bicycle lane for 1 block?
You go down, yeah.
I think that's like foolish,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
I think the area kind of cries out for a solution like this.
You need to
Have them
speak into
everywhere.
the microphone, please.
Oh, I said, I think this area sort of cries out for this green solution, that we don't have that option everywhere. And, yeah.
You know, I think we successfully did this at the end of Scarborough Avenue Extended, the rain garden swales as you come in. There are no sidewalks over there, are there?
Correct.
Yeah.
There's no sidewalk.
Now, the difference is, I think a curb would be needed here,
Yes.
otherwise people just drive.
Well, that would prevent the parking of trucks
Right,
and
right.
that aspect. The curbing, I think, is a crucial part of it. But again, the sidewalk behind it, it's kind of a sidewalk to nowhere. And it only, I think we would benefit greater from a rain garden, as I refer to it. And now I hear today the saving of the tree. And it could be a project that we could do, for the most part, in-house, I guess. You know, the cost of this now is what,
Just make it 40.
38,600.
It's 40. Just make it 40.
But I do obviously think we have a problem with the parking of the trucks. We've got, you know, signs up there now that nobody pays attention to. But if you put the curbing in, paint it yellow, which maybe is another indication, no parking there, would be helpful.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I have a curiosity. When you were just talking about your observations about people parking and the rear ends of their cars do we enforce that strictly over there? I mean, is this an opportunity in the very short term? Because we're not going to fix this in the next 3 weeks.
Well, you've got workers and transients that are new every hour.
Yes.
And you've got people parking because they're going to the Royal Farm.
I know what they're
Every
doing.
15 minutes. So unless we have somebody there full-time, it's not going to work.
Well, I guess I was wondering, one of the deterrent with someone that's more experienced than I am would be to have someone stationed there, especially in the summer when it gets so dangerous, because I agree with everything everybody's said and what they've seen. Wouldn't it make sense to put somebody there?
Personally, I think it needs to be a more permanent solution.
Oh, I don't
yeah,
disagree,
yeah, yeah.
but I'm saying in the short term, because one of the things that occurred to me is I absolutely agree this needs to be fixed, and then I see the photographs of the big trucks and so forth that park on private property and so forth. I'm thinking about the edge, whatever the edge turns out to be of the project. What's going to prevent those large vehicles from damaging what we just put in? I mean, maybe I'm just being negative, but I just wonder what kind of extraordinary enforcement we would have to put in to protect the taxpayer or the homeowner investment.
So you just drive right over the curb?
I mean, I would. That's all right, that's all right. I don't want to take anybody's time. We're not going to solve this today, but I just wanted to bubble up, you know, it seems to me.
Well, I firmly believe that if we do this and have a definitive curb there and landscaping or sidewalk, whatever's there, that it will be an absolute deterrent to vehicles parking there, because they will not be able, I mentioned earlier, vehicle parked with its rear end out in 2 or 3 feet into the road. They would be 90% of their vehicle in the travel lane if they were to park against the curb at that point.
Okay.
So I think that in itself would be a deterrent.
Okay.
Okay. You want to say something? Jeffrey, go ahead.
Just to quickly address your point, I agree with the mayor. If you just look across the street where Royal Farms, I'm Jeffrey Good, by the way, and this is my big problem. If you look across the street where Royal Farms, there is a curb and sidewalk, and in all the 4 years I've lived there, I've never seen a truck just stay there, because they'd be literally completely blocking the road. So it would be almost 100%. They wouldn't be parking on the other side of a curb. The other things I wanted to bring up that weren't mentioned is this is a very long-standing problem. Like we moved in there around 2018, and I saw immediately what the problems were. Cars, I feel sorry. The workers are trying to pick up some coffee, some cigarettes, something to eat early in the morning. The Royal Farms parking lot is always hard to park in. It's not big enough. And then when you have delivery trucks, which take up almost the whole thing, they can't park there, so they have to park somewhere. So even though it's illegal to park in that area where most of the sidewalk will be, they have nowhere else to go. So they park there. Sometimes they park almost up to my house. Like I've tried planting grass. It looks horrible. I've tried planting grass, but the in and out of the trucks completely kill it. Some of the trees you see in the pictures are being affected. They land on that. So the only real question I have is, why do we have to lose where that big tree is, and also the 2 parking spots that I did cost share with? If you look on the map.
Whoever's controlling, can you put the map up on the?
Well, no, right, yeah.
What map?
That map, the map you just have, right there where it says Columbia Avenue, there are 2.
Show this screen if you would. I mean, it shows the Google Earth and you can see what we're talking about.
How do I do that?
I'm asking whoever the controller is.
Yeah, and I'll put it up.
That should be a good picture because my car's right there.
Okay, oh, yeah, yeah.
The two cars that are parked there is point with this. These 2 cars is in a cost-shared gravel parking lot that the city with me put in. And I'm not sure why we have to lose those 2 spots. Is that because of the ADA requires the sidewalk be? I don't know, but if we could modify the plan and save money, maybe we don't need to put the sidewalk all the way down where those 2 cars are. I don't know. So that's one thing, but, and as was said, I only requested, my wife and I only requested a curb. We weren't even thinking a sidewalk. But we'd rather have the sidewalk if we can't get anything. I mean, we need to do something. And in addition to the safety issues.
Jeffrey, can you close up in 30 seconds? I'd hate to do that to you, but we literally have to close the meeting in a few minutes.
Okay, well, should I talk about the finance sharing issue, if that's an issue? I don't think,
Well, I think it may be premature to talk about that because we don't know what the plans are.
Yeah, why don't,
Okay.
here's my suggestion at this point. Because we literally are over time. I was asked to stop earlier. We got a 1 o'clock stormwater utility meeting. What I'd like to suggest is that task Evan with going back to the designer and take a look at bio swales and a garden like that and see what some other options are. That we would go to DelDOT before we bring back to us, so that we have their approval, because again, they had some input on this, but they reacted to what we put under their nose. So if we come up with 1 or 2 different designs, maybe they can do that. So I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but we'll bring that back, because there's no real critical time frame. We'll bring this back to the August workshop meeting and continue from there. Do you want to do a
Just
final
one-
word?
Just one quick comment, and Commissioner Sharp had suggested some type of enforcement. I think we probably have a few of the Jersey barriers left over from the outdoor dining that we own. Couldn't we put a couple of those up there right now, just to?
Yeah,
create-
probably, and
Create a curbing.
to follow up on Jeffrey's note there, by putting any cars on that side, it's going to promote the very next car in front of them to park in front, even though it's illegal, and then the next car. So we need to think about that. Again, Jeffrey, I'm sorry I have to cut you off. I'll give you 1 minute, that's all, because I'm really being castigated for running this meeting long. Your name and talk in front of the microphone there,
Walter
Walter.
Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue.
So if you take 80-foot of Jersey barrier and put them right along here, and then turn the last one in, you get a test.
Yeah.
You could do it this week.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good. Thank you, Walter. With that, any other?
I don't particularly want a Jersey barrier in front of my house. Come on now. I mean, maybe for a day or two.
It'd be a good test.
I don't need a test. I see it's a
Yeah,
horrible.
okay, yeah.
We do, though.
Yeah, we might.
Okay, we hear you. With that, customer announcements, the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association was intending to make a display today. They will be at some time in the future, and that is to talk about them funding and going out for an RFP for kayak launch. Review future meeting dates. Friday the 15th is the Mayor and Commissioners' regular meeting at 2 o'clock. And Tuesday, June 26th, 9 a.m. is the tree meetings. And with that, is there anybody there that has the last word?
Just one comment, just a reminder, July 19th, July 27th, and August 15th are the city manager interviews, 9 a.m. to noon on the
Days
night.
again?
9 a.m. to noon on July 19th. Again, depending on responses, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on July 27th. And again, August 15th, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and those will be in-person interviews. And talking with our search firm, we've had 25 applications so far.
Patrick, the 27th,
Go ahead.
that's virtual?
No, we will be here in
virtual for
person,
them.
but it's
Okay,
virtual
gotcha.
interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we okay? I'm sorry. I'm at least 15 minutes over and I'm getting the evil eye here. With that, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank everybody that was here and gave input. Thank the commissioners. I'll adjourn this meeting at exactly 12:44 a.m. Thank you. Everybody want to